Good evening.
Good evening, Mia.
How are you, Mr. Craver? I'm trying to figure out why my camera won't come on, but I'm here.
I wish I could turn mine off. I look tired.
Well, no worries. Yeah, I'm literally tapping the button. It's not coming on.
I hear you.
Here we go again. Jeez.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, good evening, Suki.
Hi,
Suki, I'm
Suki.
going to make you co-host really quickly and leave the meeting and come back because my video is not working.
Right. Phone. Nope. Nothing white. Uh-oh. There's someone down your shirt. I got some of it.
Okay, my video is back.
Hi, Mia. How are you?
Good. Just trying to figure out what was going on with my video for a minute. I had to leave and come back. But I'm here. Good evening, everyone. Oh, very quickly, Suki, so sorry. Spoke to Tom Thomas today. He
Okay.
has a death in the family.
Okay.
And Yakov may be joining in, but he is driving back from DC today.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Did Jakob say what time if he's going to be coming in late or probably not?
He said that he may not be able to make it, but he's in the car. I'm not sure if he's the one driving, but he said he'll try to connect at some point.
Okay,
But he said it was heavy traffic coming back from DC.
got it. Yeah. Okay, it looks like we have a good. Okay, let me see. We need to choose a vice chairperson. So let me see if we have a quorum. See, there's John, myself, Nicola, Esteban, and Pat. Okay, so our first order of first of all, welcome everybody. I'm going to waive the reading of the rules of order. Our first order of business is to choose a vice chair. So I'm first going to take attendance. Suki Cheong, I'm the committee chair, present. John Craver,
Present here.
Nicola Cox,
Here.
Pat Moses,
Yeah.
Esteban Hiron,
Here.
Tom Thomas is absent, and Yakov is absent, maybe coming in late. So, you know what? I'm going to put off the vice chair until a little bit later. Let's see if Yakov makes it in, so that we're supposed to vote on this. Okay, so we'll start off with old business and committee member updates. Do any of our committee members have any updates they want to share? Okay. Do any of the community members have any updates they want to share regarding land use? Elise, I know you said something was going on at Franklin Avenue.
Is this a land use meeting or
Yes,
youth meeting?
it is. This is land
Oh.
use.
Okay,
Pamela, nice to see you.
good to see you.
Does anybody have any updates they want to share regarding land use? Projects going on in the district? Okay, so I'm going to share a couple of updates. First of all, regarding our City of Yes for Economic Opportunities Subcommittee meeting. This is a citywide zoning text amendment that is currently in the public review process. And it's quite sweeping. It's changing several commercial zoning designations throughout the city, as well as where commercial businesses can be located. So we've met twice so far as a subcommittee to look at the different proposals. There are 18 different proposals. It's quite complex. There are 664 pages of zoning text. So we've begun discussing them, and we came up with a series of kind of background whereas statements that we felt describe the underlying conditions in CB9 of both local retail businesses and the state of our building stock and zoning as it might relate to this zoning text amendment. And we voted on 4 proposals. All of them, I would say, we had significant concerns about. And I'm just going to kind of briefly go over which ones those were. We didn't get through the whole thing. So for proposal 2, we opposed eliminating the differences between C1 and C2 districts, although we're not opposed to allowing selected additional uses in the C1 districts via a special permit process, similar to the process available for movie theaters today. There were a couple of things that we thought should be updated and added to the C1 districts. We oppose the expansion of manufacturing activities into the C1, C2, and C4 commercial overlay districts because we think we've got ample vacant space within C2 and M1 areas for those uses. And we feel that micro scale and custom manufacturing activities of small businesses could be supported by defining it in the code as an accessory use for a very limited amount of floor area, no more than 25% of the total floor area, and a total cap of a few hundred square feet. We also oppose adding commercial uses on the upper floors of buildings in C1 and C2 districts. These are mixed use districts that typically have housing on top. We just had concerns with mixing the types of housing without separate entrances and elevators. And we think commercial uses should be directed towards ground floors to help foot traffic. One of the underlying conditions that we've noted is existing vacancies along the commercial corridors. Anybody have any other comments? There's a couple of other people here who are members of the subcommittee as well.
Are you going to share the document that we were reviewing? Because I think it may be difficult for people to, follow along with what you're discussing.
Yes. Okay, so I can screen share it now. I can also just email it to all of the committee members, but since we didn't finish discussing and voting on it, maybe it would be better to wait until we're done with the whole thing. What do you guys think?
Okay, so for today's meeting, the purpose is just to kind of update them on our thought process, but we're not going to be asking anyone to review or approve anything tonight. Correct?
No, I don't. I think it would make sense to vote on the entire document all.
Okay, I agree.
Okay.
Well,
does anybody have any questions?
Well, I have a comment. Sorry, I cannot turn on my video. One of my concerns is the fact that the collapsing group 17 and group 18, the manufacturing commercial districts, groups, and allowing them into C1, C2, all C districts. And they're, when you looked at the group 18, the manufacturing group 18, which is a very severe group, they're allowing those items into commercial districts. When we at the presentation and asking specifically what items in group 17 and group 18 that you're allowing now into commercial districts, they claim that they didn't know at that time. However, when you looked at the text amendments, you find that they're allowing a lot of manufacturing items that belong in Group 18. Group 17 basically contains a lot of light manufacturing stuff, but Group 18 is the more severe of manufacturing. And I'll give an example of sugar refineries. Sugar refineries are in Group 18 because they can cause a lot of environmental hazards. Underneath the new proposal, these items, that kind of manufacturing will now be allowed in all commercial districts. And so you're moving very dangerous manufacturing businesses and allowing them into all commercial districts, not just C1 and C2. I see you're focusing on C1 and C2 because that's within CB9, but this is going to be allowed in all districts. So I think there needs to be a very strong position that the CB9 takes, in that you definitely do not want the collapsing of the Group 18 and allowing it now to exist in commercial districts, i.e. The sugar refineries. And that's just one example. I went through them pretty extensively. There's quite a number of manufacturing businesses, even though they made it appear as if it's only going to be bakeries. Trust me, it's a very long list of manufacturing things that will be allowed to go into those things. Okay.
Yeah, Alicia's right. These might be things that would typically only be allowed in a heavy manufacturing district, like an M3, and now they would be allowed in M1 and C8, which are supposed to be light manufacturing.
No, not just C8. It's in C1 through C8.
C1 through C8, right. I mean, C1 through C7 currently don't allow any type of manufacturing, not even light manufacturing. But as Alicia noted, now all types of manufacturing are going to be permitted in all districts. And although they say there are performance standards and size limits, at the end of the zoning text amendment, they go on to propose that all of those restrictions can be removed via special permit. So there really will be no restrictions for somebody who wants to try hard enough.
And then the enforcement was supposed to be done, the so-called enforcement is supposed to be done by the New York City Environmental Agency. And we have seen that they're not very good at their jobs, considering there's about a $2 billion fines that have been levied against corporations currently that don't abide by the environmental standards that are currently in place that have not been reinforced. So the idea that you're now going to allow even more restrictive and hazardous businesses into commercial districts and expect the city agencies to monitor that and ensure the safety of the public, it's really just unbelievable. It's just a really dangerous situation.
Yeah, absolutely. John?
I wasn't sure if I was remembering correctly, but Suki, when we were working on the text, which John did you mean? Did you mean me, John, or John Craver?
Yeah.
You have your hand raised, so I'm calling you.
Okay. I thought you were adding some text that described odors, noise, that those were things that were going to require a higher level of scrutiny. Am I remembering this correctly, or am I conflating some things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we, the consensus of the committee was we didn't want to stop small artisans or manufacturers or designers from doing some sewing or whatever, here and there. But we really want to limit the scale of that, and the scale that was being proposed by city planning, which is 5,000 square feet, is way beyond what would make sense in a retail district. I mean, that's you know, if our typical retail store is something like, 1,200 square feet, and you want it to be a retail district and not a manufacturing district, you should really limit the amount of space, the proportion of the space that's devoted to manufacturing, as well as the size. I mean, it's fine to have a couple of people sitting and sewing, but you don't want a little mini sweatshop crammed in, here, there, and everywhere, because believe me, they can do that even in 2,000 square feet. So yeah, and then of course there are concerns about, everybody was saying we have to look at the worst case scenario. So considering that virtually every manufacturing in category can take place, the concern is for things that might be dangerous or offensive, like the sugar refining, or the textile manufacturing, or whatever else might actually cause a nuisance. So I mean, I think it's just clear that what they're contemplating is the removal of all regulation. And I think the answer just has to be no. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Nicola?
John's right. We did have language in there. I'm trying to pull it up, just had it, that basically said any manufacturing that's not currently permitted in C1 or M1 districts should remain restricted to heavy manufacturing districts. So we can beef up that language and make that statement a little stronger, but that's part of what we had as our response.
Also, I just want to add that they themselves in their text amendment made the claim that, they're going to be conscious about, businesses that will be odorous and cause, hazardous waste, and also cause fires and and they're going to be screening that. However, you don't open up a bag of worms. You don't allow these manufacturing, especially the heavy one, Group 18, which almost all of the manufacturing in that particular group, that's why it's a separate group, causes those issues to say, okay, yes, you can come into commercial districts and we'll just make sure that you don't do these things. Who's going to make sure of that? Well, it's the public that now has to do that. So the moment that somebody opens up a sweatshop and starts to emanate fumes or anything, it's the public that now has to complain, and it's the public that now has to monitor. It's the public, because that's what we do when development is happening and the buildings don't get built right, and we see them breaking all the violations. We had one right here where we had a street that just opened up in front of us after countless of people made complaints about it. It's the public that has to now engage in the fight to get them to adhere to the current standards. But now we're going to open up that door and allow even more. And then it becomes, again, the public's responsibility to constantly fight these things. And then nothing happens. I mean, we have a development right on Bedford Avenue that's just called this major sinkhole when we were complaining for months about them causing these craters in our streets. It's ridiculous to now say, okay, let's allow more stuff in our communities that require more regulation. Manufacturing districts were created to separate, and that's exactly what the law says currently, is to separate manufacturing businesses from residential and commercial so that they do not do harm. That is the reason why. Now they're taking that reason and saying, oh, don't worry, it could cause harm, but don't worry, we'll monitor that harm. That's it. That's my last comment.
I think those are good points. Anybody else? So I do just want to mention one proposal in particular that we didn't discuss in the subcommittee, but I think it is so significant that you really all need to hear this. The proposal is to allow corner stores, to allow ground floor commercial in areas that don't currently permit it, in areas that are all residential, for example, Bedford Avenue, and within 100 feet of a corner. And it's by special permit, but there are no really specific limits on the special permit that would make it unavailable to really anyone. Anyone could make a plausible argument that they aren't, going to alter the neighborhood character if you don't think that the residential nature of that block is a fundamental part of its character. And so this could really be anywhere. And this is going to have an enormous, enormous impact on the entire city. I calculated something like if it's applied on lots across the city, something like 150 million square feet of additional commercial space. And I'm sure you've all read the commercial market is struggling. We're struggling with vacancies throughout the city. And at the same time, if that is currently residential space, it would eliminate 150 million square feet of residential space. And, if you think about how many units of housing that could be, that's if each unit of housing is 1,000 square feet, which is kind of large, that's 150,000 units of housing. If we're saying that we have a shortage of housing, why on earth would we do this? And how on earth have they issued a negative environmental assessment for this? I just thought that was worth pointing out. Anybody?
Suki, I hate to interrupt you, but very
Yes.
quickly, it looks like we have some attendees in the meeting that looks like they would be more likely looking for our youth and education meeting, and that is under a separate Zoom.
Okay.
If you're looking for the youth and education meeting, I could email you I can reply with the meeting link if you simply send a quick email to the BK09 account. Thank you.
Miss Mia, I'm sorry. I mean, Miss Hilton. Just to be clear, I believe you guys have your wires crossed because I actually just went to the youth meeting because I thought that it was this meeting. So somewhere, somehow, some people labeled the youth meeting as the ULURP and the ULURP as the youth meeting. So just to be clear.
Understood. Did you access the meeting from the website and the calendar?
It was via email that I received that I believe they did get it from the calendar.
Understood. Okay, thank you, Zhang.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now that we have Yaakov and John with us, there's another business item that we need to handle, and that's the election of a vice president. So any of you can run, and the committee members need to vote on the vice chair. The vice chair will stand in for me if I'm absent and run the meeting if I'm absent or late or somehow fall off the meeting, which has happened. So I would like to nominate Yaakov Berman. He's one of our longest serving board members. Yaakov, would you be willing to stand for vice chair?
I accept, but I'm right now in Washington, so I'm going to try to stay in the meeting as long as possible.
Okay, well, I'm here tonight. So you'd be relieved of vice chair duty for tonight. Is everybody agreed with that? Do we have a consensus on that? Should I take a roll call vote?
I object to the fact that the chair is making recommendations for the vice chair and have not allowed all the other members to make recommendations. I think also Yaakov has not been a member of this committee long. He was a committee member a couple of years ago, and he just became the committee member again this year. So I think the fact that you are now, pushing him forward without allowing the other board members to sit there and consider other options, I think.
Alicia, I've called for whether people want to do a consensus vote or a roll call vote. If somebody wants to nominate somebody else, if if the committee members want to nominate someone else.
Well, I would
Yeah,
like
I'm
to
open.
nominate Nicola
Oh,
Cox.
Alicia, though, it's the committee members who choose the
Understood.
chair.
I understood. And I'm pushing it out there. Let somebody else pick it up. I think she's been there long enough. She's been on the committee for what, 7, 8 years? Consistently, and she's come consistently to the meetings.
Nicola, are you accepting that? Are you accepting that nomination?
I just checked very quickly.
I'm not a board member, and no, I don't accept.
Thank you, Nicola. You took the words right out of my mouth. A non-board member cannot convene a CB non-committee meeting. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so committee members, are there any objections to choosing Yakov as vice chair? Raise your hands, speak out. One, calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. Okay, Mia, so you can record that we elected Yakov Berman as vice chair by common consent.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Yakov, for accepting. Okay, so moving on. So we hope to meet again in December for City of Yes. There is a 60-day review period starting October 30th. So we have until December 30th to make a comment. So we should be ready to vote on the whole resolution by our December meeting, and then take it to the general board and make our recommendations to the Department of City Planning. And we are scheduled to have them present to the board at some point in late November. I have to discuss the scheduling with the office, but I will let you guys know, and I will ask the board to send out that date to all of the board members. Okay, let's see. Okay, so City of Yes. So the third section of this is City of Yes for housing opportunities zoning text amendments. And once again, this is an extremely sweeping amendment that is going to cover the whole city. What can I say? It's basically upzoning the entire city, including CB9. And so there was a draft scope of work for the environmental impact assessment. The city, in their environmental assessment that was already released, has identified potential significant adverse impacts in basically every category. So they're going to have to do a full environmental impact statement. And there was a public hearing on the draft scope of work earlier this month. Some of you testified.
It was not a hearing. It was not a hearing, Suki. It was a meeting. Just to clarify, it's classified
okay.
as meeting, not a hearing.
I mean, it was a public meeting held by the Department of City Planning. So several members of the public, including Alicia Boyd, did come on. Basically, I think there's a lot of concern about the impact that this could have. And that ranges across the board from Staten Island to Central Brooklyn, because this is going to completely change the zoning rules as we know them today and create literally millions of units of housing. So the mayor, it's very interesting because the mayor at the beginning of the month also issued a press release, and he was saying that he is looking for 100,000 additional units by 2040. And in addition, he wants to end the parking mandates for new development. because of the cost of building parking of underground parking for developers. So developers could put in parking if they want to, which I would assume is if it's profitable for them to do so, but they no longer have to. So we could definitely see some new developments, whether affordable, not affordable, whatever, without parking or with very little parking. So that's an extremely significant change as well. What other updates do we have? I don't have any new updates on Franklin Avenue. Nothing new has been filed, although I'm hearing from some of the members that some construction is starting. I also do not have anything new on the, I just saw an email from Dante on 975 Nostrand Avenue, the fresh package. Okay. Yeah. So, Yakov?
Yeah, so I think I just wanted to, I know this the mayor's proposal is very complicated and controversial, but there was one part of it where I heard a lot of positive feedback, and that is in Crown Heights and in various parts of Brooklyn, there are R2 basements are illegal, which makes it very complicated. A lot of people are renting them anyway, and when it comes to issues, it becomes incredibly complex. Also, for safety, it becomes incredibly complex. And I think that, and some people have tried to upzone if they have an R2, which has a whole new set of problems, and people don't like upzoning. I think that part of the proposal, which I could tell you, I'm living in an R2 house, and I have a basement that's sitting empty. And I know a number of my neighbors do as well. So I think that may be one part of the proposal where at least in the Crown Heights community, there would be a lot of positive interest in allowing basements to become legal. Because again, if you look at the neighborhood, you'll have one block, you'll have the same houses, the same sizes, and in one block it's legal, the next block it's not.
Right.
So I think that's a positive element of the proposal.
So that's a good point. A lot of people do use their basements. Could I ask Yakov, first of all, like there are basements and basements, I'm sure you know this. Anything that's 50% or more above grade is legal already. But if it's an English basement like mine, which only has about like
R2, you cannot have you can't have a shower there, and you cannot have a bed down there, and I mean my understanding is you can't have any dwelling in an R2 in the basement.
Okay, so there's two issues. First, there's the issue of single family versus multifamily. R2 is restricted to single family only. So if you're trying to create a separate unit in the basement, that's against the single family part of the R2. The second issue is how much below grade it is. So like my basement is only my windows in my basement are only 3 feet high. It's not fully above grade, so it wouldn't be legal, for me to have living space down there. Although, plenty of people use it for whatever, their home theater or their laundry room or their home office or whatever. But I think you technically can't have bedrooms down there.
So that's technically a cellar, and there's a distinction between a basement and the cellar. It's that 50% that you were mentioning before. So if it's more than 50% below grade, then it's a cellar and not usable for habitable space.
Right. So Yakov, which is the issue for you? Is it the unit restriction, or is it the
unit restriction? That an R2, it's not, you can't have I know people that the city came in and they made them take out their showers in the basement because it's an R2 and they thought people were living down there. They don't let beds they don't let beds in the basement. You definitely can't rent it out.
How much below grade were they?
I'm talking about not a cellar. It was the issue was the R2 because the block down was the same basements and it was allowed.
Okay. All right. So this might be.
I'm not an expert in zoning, but maybe.
Okay. I mean, do you like it? How tall are the windows? Are they full height windows, or are they like 2 or 3 feet
I
high?
know the issue has to do with the zoning, because I know that the issue is the R2, and they've attempted, they've come and there was discussion about changing it. And the issue is the R2 is only a single residence is the issue.
But they all want to be single family still, right?
No, people have basements and they want to rent it out.
They want to rent it out. Okay, so then maybe they do want to.
Or even use it for family. I'm not sure. You're saying the
Okay.
reason why you can't have beds in a basement is because it's a cellar, not a basement.
Okay,
I
my
understanding is that my understanding always was that nobody could sleep in. John, can you maybe you could clarify? My understanding in R2 is you can't have people sleeping downstairs in the basement.
So I'm looking at the zoning resolution right now, and you are correct that R1 and R2 are restricted to single family detached residences. So if you wanted to have a second family or another demised unit in an R1 or R2, it's not permitted by the zoning resolution. So how the accessory dwelling unit proposal works, I'm not sure how that overlays with the zoning requirements. I do think that the accessory dwelling unit proposal is a good one. I concur with you. I think there's economic benefits to homeowners. It helps build generational wealth. It helps pay for mortgages. So I think it is a good thing. How it actually overlays with the R1 and R2, I'm not quite sure. And whether it actually is permitted in cellars, I'm also not sure. So I know that leaves you lacking for real clarity, but sorry, that's not my area of expertise.
So I will share. I saw that Rachel Smith on the city wrote an article about this. I'll try to find it and share with the chair, and if it's of interest, you can share with the board.
Okay. I will just say, I don't know if you live in a detached house or a townhouse, but many of us in Lefferts Manor, that's where John and I live, there actually are plenty of people who have R2 houses who are able to have bedrooms on the lower level because it's not a cellar. As John says, it's sufficiently above grade that it's available for living space. But our neighborhood is restricted by a covenant to be single family only. But in your area, if people actually want to have more than one dwelling unit, if they don't want to be single family anymore, if they want to be able to rent out a unit, most townhouses are actually built to an R5 density. That would actually be the appropriate zoning category, and that does permit more than one unit at a time. Why you're covered by an R2 zoning?
Carol,
that might be historical.
Carol between New York and Kingston, I believe, is R2, and I think it had to do with President Street. When they built the President Street houses, they didn't want Carol. So this is what the legend goes. They didn't want Carol to block the view. So that's why some of the other blocks are higher zoning, but I think Carroll between New York and Kingston are the only blocks in Carroll which are R2. But somebody could check it out.
So I think, one of the things that we talked about at the subcommittee, we want to make zoning work for our residents. And I think pretty much every community board does too. And we were really disturbed by the fact that City of Yes is a citywide thing, because what you're describing is a very sort of specific thing to a specific community, and the way things are set up in CB9, which is not at all like the way they might be set up in Eastern Queens or Staten Island. And so our solutions to this issue, which we definitely do want, we are going to be different than everybody else's. So I think one of the first things that struck us was that this is the whole thing, the economic opportunity, the housing opportunity, the zero carbon, they're very broad brush sweeping amendments covering the whole city. And what we want to be able to do is address all of our residents' concerns in the way that suits them best.
Then turn left.
Alicia?
It's, those you're talking about amendments that haven't even finished the environmental review process. I was hoping that this meeting would cover what's in front of us right now. And what's in front of us right now are the business amendments. And so we're now almost to 8 o'clock. And we've only touched one item or two items from the 17 recommendations. So if we continue to talk about the housing ones that's not even before us yet, we're going to run out of time to talk about the business. So I would respectfully ask this committee to focus on what's in front of them and what we have to respond to within the next 45 days. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are going to have a third meeting to discuss City of Yes for economic opportunity, because we just didn't get through all of those proposals, but we will. Does anybody here have any additional comments on economic opportunity?
Oh, so you're not going to go section by section, you're just going to just ask the public what it is that they, I mean, because
Well,
a lot of.
because that's what we were doing during the subcommittee meeting, and we're gonna have to do it again.
Okay, well, there are other things, but I wanted to give other people an opportunity to speak, but there are definitely other issues that I have with the business amendments, especially because I've done a thorough review of the 700 pages of the text amendments. So I'll be quiet.
Okay, so anybody else? And then we'd certainly like to hear from you. Anything that really stands out to anybody that you feel has to be addressed? Zhang?
Good evening, everyone. I just have a quick question. I want to ask questions about potential development project that is supposed to be taking place. So I wanted to know, is now the time that I ask the questions, or do I wait till a later time if there's any time available?
We'll take community concerns at the end, and we're going to try to keep it moving pretty quickly. So if you can wait till after, like around 8 o'clock, 8:15.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, Alicia, take it away.
One of the things that I'm very concerned about is the changing of what you call a home occupation. Normally, right now, if you have a private house or you live in an apartment building, you can create a small, you can create a home occupied business. Currently, it's only one person that you can hire. They normally are very low key, like maybe going to an acupuncturist, or you might have someone do, a lawyer might be doing something, an accountant might be doing something. And these normally reside, as I said, in residential buildings. They want to change that requirement, and they want to turn the term into small business. So that means that they're changing the term itself, and no longer is going to be a home occupied space, but it's a small business where you can now employ up to 3 people. So this is going to open up the idea of just having quote unquote small businesses all in your community. They're also increasing the amount of space up to 49%. Currently is 25% of your space that can be done. So that means, let's take for an example, and we're talking about worst case scenario. Let's take you're living on a residential block, and you have a homeowner who owns two, one family house, and they want to create a restaurant or a small little bar. They can use 1 floor of their space, less than 49% or less. They can hire 3 people to do that small business. And now you have literally a small restaurant or a little cafe sitting on your block that then will generate, traffic and noise and all that. And it would be legal because it's now a small business and no longer, a family occupied 1 person. So that's a major shift and change in the zoning text amendments that I feel are quite disturbing, taking that portion away from people. The other one that got a lot of press and not getting any press any longer is, the dancing and the cabaret. Now small businesses. Now remember, small business now would be allowed to, you can have a cabaret literally inside somebody's private home. You could have a small bar, you can have dancing in that space because you would be classified as a small business, and a small business will be able to occupy that space. And so now you can have dancing because you now can have dancing in all commercial corridors, whereas dancing used to be restricted to only certain types of commercial corridors. For example, on Empire Boulevard, they used to allow dancing. It's still allowed, it's a CA2. It still allows small dancing, but you couldn't have anything in some of the other commercial districts. Now you'll be able to do that, not only in the commercial district, but inside of people's homes, inside of residential buildings. So that means is that if you decide, if you have a large enough space, you have a 4-bedroom house, for example, apartment, and you decide you want to take half of that, 49 or less, and turn that into a small little cabaret place, and you hire 3 people, well, guess what? You now have a commercial space inside of a residential building. Those ramifications are very, very serious because this will be as of right. This will not have to be approved by anyone. They also have removed the restrictions. There used to be restrictions on the types of small businesses that could exist inside of residential buildings underneath this zone. And so that means is that you couldn't have a barber shop or nail salon or beauty parlor. And that's because, those types of businesses first generate a lot of traffic. And second, they have a lot of odorous, they require, certain types of ventilation and stuff like that. And that now, all those restrictions have been removed. And so now any small business, including, a nail salon, a barber shop, a hair salon, and the other restrictive businesses will now be allowed to coexist inside residential buildings and inside of private homes. So I think that particular issue is strong, along with the allowing the dancing in all commercial districts on all commercial corridors, because I think, I know I live on the back of Empire Boulevard, and 4 o'clock in the morning when they get out, it was just noisy. The cops were probably noisier than the people with the bill horns. I used to go to the community board meetings and complain about the cops. They made more noise than the people, telling people to move on, all the congregation. I mean, just imagine that kind of business happening, on your block, so that's a major issue and concern that I have. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that.
Anybody have any comment? Cheryl?
Hi, good night, everybody. Thank you, Alicia, for those findings. The sad part is when they present this case and when they present this situation, they already have something lined up. So what it is that they already know what they want to put there or plan to put there, but they're presenting it in another way. Once this is approved, once this goes through, we cannot change it. It will not be able to be changed. And there's no person on the City of Yes, on CB9, and this Zoom can guarantee that once these type of facilities are uprooted, that we will be able to say, okay, there's never going to be any trouble. There's never going to be any gunshots or people, the place getting robbed and bullets flying. I mean, we have to live in the times that we're living in now, and let's open our eyes and see what's going on. If they present this in this way, there will always be, like I said in the beginning, worst case scenario for every situation. Think about what can happen, and who can guarantee that nothing will ever happen? If you don't have a nightclub in the middle of the street in someone's private basement, you won't have that situation or that issue. We have to think about, like I said in the beginning, from weeks ago, worst case scenario for everything. And not to say that we want to limit people from having businesses, because there are legitimate businesses out there. There are people that have good communities, you know, a business that's probably profitable and may help, but we have to always take into consideration, we cannot guarantee that nothing will ever happen.
Nicola, and then Rod.
I agree with Alicia, and it was something we discussed at length in the subcommittee meeting about the cabaret and the dancing and where we ended up. Because again, we're trying not to just say no, 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 no. We were trying to justify the reasons. And you know, there may be a handful of potential opportunities out there that it makes sense for a community. So we said, all right, you need a special permit. It needs to go through some kind of a formal process, not just a blank check to across the city that these types of dance halls would be allowed. So that's where we came out to try and allow for the fact that it may make sense for some communities. In a community like ours, it probably doesn't. And we want to be able to have the community board and others review and determine if it makes sense or not.
So just to be clear, you want this process to go through a ULURP application? If you
a
want
BSA, some kind of a special permit.
Yeah, so actually, I just want to say that there is currently a special permit to allow dancing in C2, C4, and C6 districts in the city. As you all probably know from our discussion in last time, we have C1 and C2 districts on our major avenues, and then we have C8 on Empire Boulevard, and we have M1, and we have a tiny, tiny corridor patch of C4 on the northern edge of Utica Avenue. So most C4 and C6 districts are in Manhattan or other, you know, major business districts. And that is where you would expect to have more of the nightlife. But even then, under the current code, it's by special permit, which means that they do have to go before the BSA and talk about what they're going to do to mitigate noise and crowds and traffic and so on. Rod?
So just to echo, I guess, what everybody else is saying and what I mentioned before in the subcommittee, the concerns with these cabarets or nightclubs or dance halls, etc., you know, especially during the evening hours, you know, the vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic, noise issues and complaints, and also trespassing onto private property or other people's property. And I don't agree with having these type of establishments, you know, in residential areas or within our community. I believe our community can handle it.
So you want a blanket no, not even a permitting process?
I say no. Correct. I don't even want them around. Correct.
I agree.
Alicia and then Zhang.
Well, I'm just going to go to the next topic, so I'll let Zhang go and anybody else on this topic, because I have another issue as well.
Yeah, I object to the blanket allowing these establishments to be in these communities, but I will agree to the special permits. But my question is, like, what's wrong with the current process as it is? Like, what's causing all these changes to be done? I mean, I feel that the way things are now and has been in place works. So why look for problems by shaking things up?
Well, so there's a committee called BLAST. Maybe Alicia wants to talk about that.
Yeah, this was an initiative by Eric Adams, the mayor, on behalf of the real estate industry. Frank Carone was his chief of staff for the first year. And they got together and they looked at the zoning. Frank Carone
Well, tell them what BLAST stands for, first of all.
I don't really know what it means. As far as I'm concerned, is blast your way into everybody's fucking community. That's what I take it as, but I don't really know the acronym. But really what it is, it was designed by the real estate industry and Eric Adams looking at the zoning and saying, how can we get past all of these restrictions that we currently have? Like, we want to be able to do a lot more things in the city. We want to be able to build more. We want to be able to have commercial and more spaces. And we have all these restrictions. And let's go ahead and open up the door wide. A lot of these proposals are already being implemented in very small measures in Manhattan, like, because Manhattan is a very large, as tall skyscrapers, got tons of people. So they do some of these restrictive types of zoning in Manhattan. So they decided, well, let's just make it 5 boroughs. Let's just do the whole 5 boroughs, one sweep, one rezoning, or 2 or 3. And let's just get it all, everything that we want. So one of the things was, we want to be able to have cabaret and bars everywhere. We don't want the restriction. We don't want to have to go and ask permission. We want to just be able to have it as of right. And so the new text amendments are now before you, because this is really what the real estate industry and developers basically want from our city. No, there was no petition signed by communities. Nobody proposed these changes from the community. The community was not asked what we wanted. We were just presented with all of these proposals and then said, well, what do you think about this? We're going to go through the process. We're going to certify it. We're going to move it through. But we want to now hear what you have to say about it. And to be honest with you, most of these changes, if there's not enough community resistance, may become law, and they will be now as of right. And so the burden of our policing and ensuring that, we live in a community where which is safe and doesn't have noise, really will then fall upon the individual residents and the community, and allow developers basically to do whatever it is that they want to do in our community. So there was no push from the community for these changes. This was done purely by Eric Adams, Frank Carone, and, city agencies telling us what they want for us. And then trying to convince us that all of these things will be beneficial to us because it's going to create more commercial businesses and generate more money for the city. And won't we be a better place if we had more money for the city? And so that's really how that works. And so now it's sitting in front of you, it's sitting in front of us for our review.
Hey, John?
So I'd like to offer maybe a slightly different perspective, but very much
developer's perspective. Let's just be clear, he is a developer. So let's just be clear about who he is.
Actually, I'd like to be accurate. I'm an architect, not a developer.
Who works for developers and works for—
Alicia, don't interrupt him. You can speak
I think it's important for us to know who he is, so when he talks about his position, that we understand where his position is coming from.
Which is absolutely fine, and I've disclosed that to this group.
Go ahead, John. The developer architect.
Please call me an architect. So, I think Alicia's right. This is and Suki is right. This is a broad set of changes that are being proposed. Maybe the Adams administration is being a little expansive in what they're asking for. But I think when politicians run on a platform of addressing the affordable housing crisis, this is kind of how this happens. I mean, there's a portion of the housing opportunity text change that's called UAP. It's a terrible acronym, but it stands for Universal.
So actually, we're about to talk about that. But did you have any comments on economic opportunity before?
No,
want
no,
to?
I was just adding to the topic of how did we get here?
Oh,
So,
okay.
yep. So if
Okay.
if you want to have more time to get back to other stuff, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Perfect. So, okay. So, we're going to continue our discussion from last time about
I have one more thing, one more comment.
quickly,
If I
Alicia, because it's almost 8:15
I
and we have to leave.
understand that it was my understanding that that's what this would be. The other issue that I have with the business text amendments is the fact that they're allowing businesses, all types of businesses now to exist on residential floors and even on rooftops. They are making the claim that right now, currently, if you notice, most people don't notice, but all of the commercial corridors, you normally have businesses on the bottom of your on the ground floor. So you have your drug stores, you have your liquor stores, you have your restaurants, and then sometimes you'll have a business on top on that first floor level. But these are normally low key businesses. The lawyer's office, there might be a dentist's office, it might be because it's restricted. They're now going to allow all the businesses that currently exist on the ground floor now to go into the first floor. And then they're also going to add another floor. So now it's going to be not only on the first floor, but on the second floor. So now you can have, let's say, for example, you can have a restaurant now existing on your second floor or on the first floor, where currently you can only exist on the ground floor. And they're also allowing these types of businesses on the rooftops. So that means is that you can now have a restaurant on the rooftop. So if, God forbid, you live underneath that restaurant, you got complaints of people, just imagine a restaurant on top of the floor that you live on. Currently, the only restriction to that is they have to have a separate entrance. So that means is that if people are going to that restaurant, for example, on the second floor, for example, they have to have a separate entrance to get to that restaurant. But once they are on the floor, there is no separation between the restaurant and the residential floor. So that means there could be all these residential apartments, and now you will be seeing all of these people coming to that business that will now have access to that floor. Now that can pose a serious danger to the current residents, because now people will be allowed to be inside of your home on your residential floor. And there's nothing in the text amendment that says that the business itself, once it exists inside of that residential building, that it has to be separate from the other residential places, the other residential apartments. So take, for example, you live on the second floor, all of a sudden now you can find, worst case scenario, a club, a dance club on the second floor. And all those people that are coming to that dance club will then have access to your residential space. So that means that they can now wander down the corridors or hang in front of your apartment building as they're trying to solicit numbers from the girls who are coming out of the bar at 4 o'clock in the morning. And all of this traffic can now go up and down that residential floor. And so that's a serious concern that people should have about the safety and the accessibility of having strangers now access your residential building and your residential quarters. Because also don't forget, once they're on that residential floor, they now can just go through the stairwell and get access to other residential places, other residential floors. So you can go to the second, now you could be on the third floor, the fourth floor, the fifth floor. And so there's really no clear separation between these commercial businesses and the residential portion of a building, except for how to get to that residential business and how to come out of that residential
Alicia, can you wrap it up?
That's it.
Okay. No, those are all very good points. And so I would ask all of you who are interested or concerned about it, and it should be everyone, to come to this next City of Yes for Economic Opportunity Subcommittee meeting. They're really, and really, whether it's housing you're interested in or transportation or economic development, there's going to be a significant impact in all of those areas, even though it's labeled economic opportunity. So do please come and share your insights with us.
So
Okay.
Suki, when is that scheduled? When is that?
We have not scheduled it yet, but I will ask the office to let you all know. Okay. So can you all
Will you
see?
be sending out an email for that? Because the email
Yes.
blast,
Yes. Mia, can you make sure that the email notice goes out to all of the community partners?
Of course.
Thank you.
We'll do a separate contact blast for it.
Yes. Okay, so can you all see my screen share now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a map that I put together. It's at a website called nyczoning.org. And this is our community district. This shows the development between 2010 and 2022. The red buildings are buildings that have already gone up, and the blue are buildings that are permitted, but not yet completed. And so they might be in various stages of construction. Some of them might not have started at all. And so you can see that in our community district, we've completed 3,883 units, and we have 2,622 units permitted. You can move the map around to see other districts. I think as someone mentioned before, maybe John, you can see that we're kind of in the middle for the city in terms of the number completed. And the number that we have permitted, again, I would say, and, any of the architects who are present, you can speak to this. I would assume that some of them may never come through for one reason or another. Sometimes somebody doesn't get the financing, doesn't get a permit, whatever, they abandon it. But a significant number, well, let me just say, a significant number of them will go through if they're already fully permitted.
Yes.
So, and think about this in the context of what I said earlier, that the mayor is suggesting a goal of 100,000 units citywide. And so we looked at the totals also by borough, and for the city as a whole over here on the right. So Brooklyn has built 88,000 units so far, Bronx 36,000, Manhattan 53,000, Queens 51,000, Staten Island 7,500, for a total of 237,000. And permitted, we have a total of 119,674.
So this is over a period of 10 years, right?
Well, the completed is over the last 12 years, and the permitted is what is potentially upcoming.
Yeah.
And that is currently before City of Yes. And I have not included anything that is currently pending rezoning. For example, Vital Brooklyn, or any of the other projects that we've discussed in the past, like the Atlantic Avenue Mixed Use Program, or there's a Midtown rezoning that's going on that's expected to be, I think, 7,000 units. I think there are some major rezonings that got announced in Queens Western Queens recently that were for a few thousand units each. John might have a more comprehensive list of them, but there's a lot that's going on every year in terms of individual site rezonings or small neighborhood rezonings. So I just wanted to, again, kind of go over this so that you can see kind of the impact of what we've already done, which I think is a lot. It's a lot in a short period of time. And you can also see the zoning districts here and the impact that the zoning has on development. You can see there's a lot of development happening in the R6 districts, a lot happening in the R7 districts. There really isn't a lot happening in R2, R4, R5. because, and then there are the non-residential districts, the C8 and the M1, because the R2, R4, and R5 are low density districts. And so they tend, you know, the houses and the small buildings there tend to not get redeveloped. How would you predict if something is going to be redeveloped or not? Something that we learned from one of the former land use advisors, Richard Barak, is that if the size of the building, if the square footage of the building is less than half what could be potentially built, what's potentially allowed under the zoning, then a developer might have an incentive to demolish that building and build up to the maximum possible square footage. Okay, so actually, but before, does anybody have any comments on this so far? And, you know, like I said, you can move this map around, you can look at other areas, you can look at the totals for the city. And this is just what's happened in the past and what's likely to happen in the future. So, and before I move on, any comments?
Suki, I would say that 50% test that Richard Barak mentioned, I think it's a little more nuanced than that. If that 50% is only going to be, you know, a couple thousand square feet, no one's going to bother. There's got to be some there in order to really make it a viable opportunity. So I don't know, that's one qualifier I would add to that.
Okay, I can't see who's raising their hands at the moment. Mia, can you call on someone?
Sure, Mr. Claver, and then Ms. Boyd.
Just to put a little bit of historic information into this, checking the growth of New York City's population since April of 2010, in the 10-year period from 2010 to 2020, the population increased by just shy of 630,000 people. So that, to put that growth of units into perspective, that's basically not quite 3 people per unit in growth to make. So just want to add, so things are, New York City has grown. Obviously COVID has impacted that as well. But you know, we're not stuck in 2010's population. Things have changed.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I think it is important to look at how population has changed. I think the latest numbers that came in for this census for the end of 2022 is that we're at 8.35 million. So that's significantly down actually from the 2020 census. The 2020 census had 8.8 million, and we apparently lost a large number of people during COVID, and the census estimates since then have continued to show losses. It's quite shocking.
Ms. Boyd and then Ms. Bernard.
Well, I wouldn't call it quite shocking. I would just call it the fact that people are not loving New York City and the way in which we've allowed all this development to happen and still not be able to house the average person. What John is failing to see or has not disclosed is the amount of people who have been displaced as a result of all of this development that's going on. Say, for example, Brooklyn, we're looking at Brooklyn statistics, almost 90,000 units have been created in Brooklyn, basically in communities of color. And yet that same population has been displaced and removed out of their communities. So what we're creating, you know, everybody wants to create. Everybody wants to build. We're clearly not building for the average New Yorker. And I think people are kind of being a little disillusioned. But Suki, if you could bring back that map, I do want to focus on the map.
Yes.
You could bring it back up.
Yeah. Here
okay.
we go.
what people need to realize is that those R2, R5s, R4s, and will have a significant increase in development potential. That will currently, our zoning kind of protects those zones. They're protecting the R2, the R4s, the R5s from development, as this map shows you. The new proposed text amendments will eliminate those protections because they're going to increase substantially the amount of billable space or the FAR. And so those protections, well, let me finish.
Hold that thought though, because I'm going to get to it.
Okay. So I think that we do have to be conscious that the current zoning, which still allows development, as you can see, they're still developing. There will be even more development, and it will be centered in Brooklyn. They've been promising us that, oh, we're just going to spread the love around, and more people will be able to build, in Staten Island and stuff. But Brooklyn is the hot spot. It's not changing from being the hot spot. And so we can see those numbers increasing drastically in our community if these text amendments are done. And that would include the current more protected zones, which is the R2, R4s, R5s.
Well, yeah, so to get back to just, I really want people to get a sense, before we even talk about what the text amendments are bringing, I really want people to get a sense of what's happened in the past. And Alicia's right. Brooklyn in the last 12 years is the borough that has built the most. And in terms of what's permitted, we're going to continue to build the most of any borough. We do have a large land area. I think only Queens has a larger land area. Staten Island has almost as large a land area as us, but of course, Staten Island is mostly zoned for 1 and 2 families. So, in that regard, I think 7,500 single families is actually quite a lot to have been building when you think about it. But yeah, so I want people to just think about the total that's been completed and the total that's been permitted. And this is interesting to me because the goal is to build 100,000 units, right? Anybody have any other comments? Mia, were there any other hands up?
I believe Ms. Bernard had her hand up.
Yeah, Cheryl?
Yes, I just wanted to kind of clarify, but I think you did. So the total completed is what is completed, but the total permitted are what's coming?
Yes.
That is what is coming, and not all of them may come through, but I would say I would assume at least half of them are going to end up going through. Does that sound John? Is that reasonable?
I'd say more like 90%. I mean, if you're going to go to the trouble to get a permit, you're going to build. If you've paid the fees for a whole consultant team, and yeah, you're going to build it if you got the permit.
Yeah.
That's really sad, and that no one sees that this is going to be an issue.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's disheartening is the fact that the Department of City Planning has come to our community and said, oh, we're going to put the pressure off of Brooklyn, and spread that pressure to other boroughs like Staten Island, when we know that that's not going to be the case. Developers they build in hot communities. They build in communities that they feel will make them with their return, higher. Who wants to live in Staten Island? Staten Island is, basically almost considered a separate city for some people. But definitely Brooklyn will be the target, as it currently has been the target. And again, why aren't we putting against this development statistics about the displacement of people of color in Brooklyn? I think you can, if you're going to do this statistical analysis about development and then say that you want to develop more because you want to house people, then let's look at the displacement of those people. I mean, I think that this committee needs to look at that and not just say, oh, we wanted to build, but has the building actually house the people. And you will find that in actuality, there's a direct correlation between displacement and building. So I would ask that the commission, if you're going to look at that, you should look at displacement as an issue as well.
That's a very good point, and we'll talk about that shortly. Okay, so I want to share a new screen with you as promised. We want to look at the effects. Apologize. Okay, let me just. Okay, there we go. So in this map, what I'm showing is what could be built in the future, and specifically what buildings are likely to be demolished and rebuilt. And I didn't even look at potential alterations. John, I know you said that it's not likely for smaller lots that somebody would demolish, but it's fairly common. And, you know, many of the board members have seen this on their blocks, that somebody adds a significant amount onto a smaller building, like somebody adding 2 stories on top of a 2-story townhouse.
So that's not quite what I said, or maybe that's not what got conveyed. But you know, if you can couple a couple buildings together or a couple lots together,
right,
then it might make it more worth it. So again, it's nuanced.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. And we do often see that happen as well. And people really underestimate how often that happens. You know, but even just single buildings, there are many cases of single buildings having 2 units on top of a 2-unit building, or like at One Sullivan Place, 6 stories on top of a 6-story, you know, fully occupied rent stabilized apartment building. I think that was a first for me that I'd seen that, but apparently it happens a lot in Manhattan. So anyway, so these are the buildings that are potentially at risk of demolition in the cyan color. And the cyan color is
just for clarification, is
Alicia,
this
let me
under current
finish.
zoning? Is this underneath the current zoning? You didn't specify.
Yes, the cyan color, okay, this aqua color here, these are buildings that are at risk of demolition under the current zoning. So this is what I think you all need to pay attention to. First of all, is that our current zoning is very bad, right? Most of you are not protected. Most of you are only protected by, really, as John says, what a developer feels is worth it, and they tend to go for the lowest hanging fruit first. So they'll go for something that's more underbuilt, but eventually they'll get to you, and you're all potential. And sometimes somebody does something that's not rational just because they can. You know, not everybody's that smart, right? And so all of these are really potentially at risk. And you've all seen some of this on your blocks. Almost every block, I think, has had some kind of development on it. The red are units that would additionally be at risk due to the City of Yes UAP zoning. And, you know, as I said, I'm not even looking at potential alterations. There are going to be a lot more of those, particularly for larger buildings that might be getting some extra square footage, but, you know, not nearly enough to demolish a building.
Should I describe, or Suki, do you want to describe what UAP is?
So that's the Universal Affordability Program, which is a voluntary incentive program that would add between 20% and 75% extra density in all of the higher density zoning districts, which is R6 and R7. And if you go back to the original nyc.org zoning map, you'll see that most of District 9 is covered by R6 zoning. And that zoning district is getting a 75% upzoning. This is very key to remember. City planning is telling people that it's a small upzoning. For our district, it is not. It is a very large upzoning.
Suki, how do you get the 75%?
So, well, our R6 zoning along a narrow street is a 2.4
2.
density,
2.2.
and it's going up to 3.9, according to what they've told us so far. Okay, so this is what would be the total effect of this. Citywide, as of right, additional buildable units, we've calculated 3.5 million. And as I said, you know, we're only looking at, we're really only looking at units buildings that could be demolished or vacant lots or so on. We're excluding landmark districts, excluding co-op buildings, because we think it's unlikely they would sell themselves to demolish, you know. So citywide, I think there's an additional 3.5 million buildable units as of right. Brooklyn-wide, 827,000. In CB9, 34,692 units, 690 units can be built as of right under the current zoning. Think about that. We currently have 41,000 additional units. So under our current zoning, if we did nothing, this would lead to the number of units doubling. That's quite frightening if you think about that. And we'll talk a little bit about, you know, the environmental effects in a little while. Additional buildable units under this universal affordability preference would be 23,728. So that's an additional 50% over, so actually it's more than, okay, so it's more than 50% more than what would be buildable as of right. And citywide, this would lead to an additional 1.5 million buildable units as of right. So compare that to what the mayor is actually asking for, which is 100,000. Okay. Comments.
Suki, I do have my hand up. I'm not sure if you can see it or not.
Yeah, Mia, can you call on people?
Give me one moment, Suki. I see Wolfling and then I see Ms. Boyd.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. So this UAP program, the increase of FAR is voluntary, but that increase has to be affordable. It has to be affordable housing. So I was starting to describe this program when I talked about our elected officials running on platforms of increasing affordable housing. So these 23,000 units that this chart shows, in theory, that should all be affordable housing. Now, where that affordability is a good question. Whether it's, you know, AMI that matches the neighborhood or some other metric that maybe isn't really affordable is a good question. But that's the intent here, is that this UAP program builds affordable housing.
Well, I wouldn't say that they would all be affordable, right? Because if this existing, okay, so first of all, the mayor has suggested that the affordability level would be $100,000 for a family of 3. We know from the last time we talked that median income for this district is about just below 70,000, maybe 65, 67,000. So this is likely to be a level that's significantly above median income for the district. So it wouldn't really be affordable housing. It would at best be market rate housing.
Well, I think you've got to be careful about how he describes.
The second issue is if this leads to the demolition of additional units that wouldn't have been demolished before. Like, let's take, for example, a townhouse on Fenimore Street, right? That is in the R6 zone. Under the present zoning, this wouldn't be demolished. Under a UAP zoning, it would be demolished, right? And it would be rebuilt several times larger. 80% of those units would not be income restricted in any way. 20% would be reserved for families making $100,000 or more. And to speak to Alicia's earlier point about where this might be concentrated, I would expect, because it's a voluntary incentive, that it's going to be used in the districts with lower median incomes, where the developers get to essentially build market rate or above market rate housing with a free zoning bonus, right? If they use it in parts of Manhattan or Park Slope or wherever where the median income is significantly above 100,000, they'll be giving something up. So they won't bother to use it, but they will use it in our district. They'll use it in Bronzeville. They'll use it in, Flatbush, and they'll use it in Bushwick. They'll use it in the Bronx. They'll use it in places where median income is lower. So it is going to be concentrated. The density and the demolitions are going to be concentrated in the lower income districts. That's what I would expect because it's a voluntary incentive. Sorry. So did you want to say something, or is
I just wanted to point out that you've got to take that 100,000 with a grain of salt. He's probably referencing a citywide average and not district by district. So the AMI is going to vary per neighborhood. So you got to be careful about what you quote. The mayor should be more careful about what he says, but he's probably trying to just get the
text amendment, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. I have my hand up.
Alicia?
We've done this for a decade. I know John has been living in our community for a long time and just decided to get himself involved in our community board recently as his project is coming through the ULURP process, or through the process of coming before the community board. But we dealt with this so-called affordable housing and, the target population and, the AMI. So we've already been through all of that. And what we have noted, and MIH is an example of the exact same thing, is that when developers are given a choice, and they will be given a choice, trust me, they will continuously build a housing that they label affordable that is not affordable to the average New Yorker in New York City, or even in our communities. So, you hear the debate, but the AMI is a little bit low in your community, but we know that developers constantly choose the higher AMI. They constantly, and out of all the affordable housing units that have been created in our community, and we have that information, we can show exactly the fact that the units that are being proposed underneath the affordable categories are actually higher in price than the market rate. So I've looked at a studio, for example, being $1,900 in, our community, underneath the affordable category, where the studios on the market were $1,500. So before we start talking about, whether the AMI is correct or not, what we need to do is you need to go back and look at what has already been built underneath the affordable categories and see if, in truth, that actually has been affordable for the general population. And what you will find is that it has not. So this is just another label, another scam being proposed by developers to say, we're going to build affordable housing, quote unquote, that will never be affordable to the residents in our community.
John Craver, and then Zhang. And then Andrew.
Sorry. Thanks, Suki. I just have a very simple and honest question. It's something I have no knowledge about. Has there been a study done of what the development potential of our district or citywide, even better, based on current zoning? Obviously, there are development opportunities, potential that exist with the current zoning. What does that look like?
That's pretty much what this is. That's what this is. I don't know
so
if
this
anybody
is based on current zoning.
This is, yes. This is
not the
all,
city, yes.
yeah, this is all open data that I got off of, Pluto and Department of Buildings and so on. And then I ran it against existing zoning. And as I said, I really only looked at additional units that were due to housing being demolished or something being built on a vacant lot or whatever. I didn't even look at additions like what we've seen on some blocks.
Okay. And,
Yeah.
just as
So
a point of,
and I do have the data citywide. I just it takes a long time to generate the maps. So I only generated the map. But as you can see that this is the not citywide, the number is 3.5 million units.
how big is the average unit? Is it
I
700 square
assumed
feet?
an average unit of 800 gross square feet, 700 net square feet, because that's
Like one
like
bedroom
I,
unit.
right? I think that's usually what city planning
Yeah. Okay.
assumes.
Yeah, it's like a fairly typical unit condo development for a one bedroom.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, there'll be studios and there'll be 2 bedrooms, but on average, that's kind of what I said.
Sure. Okay.
But if somebody else wants to, look at this too, yeah, I think they should. Because these numbers are very surprising to me. Zhang?
Good evening. It appears to me that the amount of the residents who currently live in the community that are opposed to this project is outnumbers the people who are for this project by a landslide. So now my main concern is opposed to destroying the community that's been home to us residents for many decades. What options have been explored to not proceed with this project? Because I feel that if there's ever a project that's going to destroy a community, that should be the absolute last alternative. Like, what's wrong with going to places like upstate New York, where they have many acres upon acres of open land?
Well, and you're talking specifically about Vital Brooklyn, right? Or are you talking
No,
about the whole City of Yes thing?
I'm not talking about only Vital Brooklyn. I'm talking about Vital Brooklyn. I'm talking about City of Yes. And I'm talking about these developers when they use like word obfuscation and use terms and acronyms to confuse the average resident that isn't a developer, that doesn't clearly understand a lot of these jargons that they're using to try to implement building all of these developments within their communities, within these communities that never existed before. Like, there's alternatives. Whenever you're trying to uproot or change anything within the community to the shackling of the residents, there should always be alternatives explored as at first.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. That's what the environmental law requires. The other thing that needs to be discussed is what is actually the goal, right? What is the goal of all of this development?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they'll always say that the goal is to increase affordable housing and so on and so forth. Now, I've never heard a resident within this community say we're against affordable houses and we don't care where homeless people stay. We're not saying that. But what we're saying is that we don't want our communities to be destroyed. These developers don't live in our in this East Flatbush community. Well, no, that's not fair because the developers do live all over New York City. But what I'm saying is that there are other alternatives. I think before destroying or drastically changing a community, because even with Alicia Boyd, what Alicia Boyd is saying is absolutely alarming. It's scary and it's something that's a nightmare. It's the Twilight Zone. So now, when you're trying to make these drastic changes, I think we should always explore alternatives first. Once alternatives fail, then we could try making these impacts to this community. But again, I stand firm. why not try to have these developments in upstate New York, where there's acres upon acres upon acres of open land?
Andrew?
Can I respond to that? Andrew,
Well, let Andrew speak first, and then you can respond, because I don't think Andrew's spoken yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi. No, I'll be quick. I have points written down, I promise. And it is a good point about upstate or Long Island. I mean, that has been a failed, Esteban can vouch for this, a failed land use increase in housing density proposal that's been on the budget or the ballot for like the last 3 or 4 years. So that point is well taken. But I want to say a couple of things. First, Suki, alterations, the majority of the kinds of alterations that we see in New York City are interior facing only. So they really can destroy the availability of affordable existing housing without changing the quality of the neighborhood. These are not the boogeyman developers. And like the statistic thing that John shared a couple meetings ago, like for example, Carroll Gardens saw -3 housing units developed in 2020, despite very large developments going on. Please, this is the elephant in the room. We need to talk about this, especially because we have dense multifamily existing corridors that, might not actually be quote unquote developed, but could be altered without any sort of approval to make gentrification and displacement much worse. I also want to say, I really appreciate you doing the data crunching, but I think that these statistics are quite alarming. Like 1/3 of buildings are not going to get demolished today where we live. And that's what your sheet says. I think that's not helpful to make rational decisions about our land use future. Third, I want to say just blanketly that AMI is calculated by the New York City region. It is not as local as we would like it to be. I know this is a common frustration, and I would like to see that the frustration with how AMI is calculated be its own political engine. I think it's fully valid and reasonable to say we want AMI to actually be based on our neighborhood area or our community district or some combination of the nearest 5 census blocks. That is a totally valid and reasonable ask. And to Alicia's comment, I have seen MIH option 1 or 2 be used. So people aren't just always going for the most money that they can possibly make. There is some nuance to it. And I also maybe you can answer this. Where did you find a studio apartment for $1,500? I'd be very interested, because boy.
Well, let me explain that to you, because this is a decade, and I know you haven't been around, Andrew, for a decade in our community. You sound very new here. So let me just explain to you. When they first came up with the MIH program was in 2016, which I'm sure you was not here in 2016. They came up with that proposal. And in that proposal, they created some apartment buildings in 2018 and 2019, where they were advertising right around the block from me, on Lefferts Avenue, $1,900 for a studio. And at the time,
this is a new building.
Excuse me, Andrew, let me finish. At the time, the studios were going for $1,500 in my community and $1,900 underneath the affordable category. Now that number obviously would increase because the MIH has increased, the AMI has increased. And so you would probably find now the studios going for $2,300, where you still can find an apartment for maybe $1,700, $1,800. And if you don't look for the studio, look under $1,800 and you will find apartments in my community for $1,800. Thank you. Just responding back to Andrew.
No. You were going to speak next. It's totally fine.
Yeah. So am I speaking next? Suki? I was just responding to it. That was not my turn. I'm responding to Andrew for his question.
Yes.
Because clearly he's new in our community. So as far as Zen as far as your question is concerned, one of the things that if you do so-called an environmental review process, one of the first requirements is to see if you have actually looked at alternatives to this particular proposal. So if you're talking about an individual proposal, there's supposed to have been some exploration by the applicants to look at other places. What most communities do, very well organized communities, is they find those places for the developer. right? And they say, oh, this is a better alternative. However, the developers don't choose that alternative, and they're now forced to choose that alternative. The environmental assessment review process, which is just a review in which they're looking at the environmental consequences of the development project, is really just a review process. It's just an exposure. They just expose what the hazardous conditions what could happen in the community, but it doesn't stop a project. Even though it kind of wheeled like, oh, don't worry, we're going to have an environmental review, so we're going to make sure that this, this development project, doesn't cause harm. No, it's just an exposure process. All it does and all it has to do is say, hey, I can cause harm to this development project. And you know what, when they say that, they say, but we have no alternative. The alternative that the community gave us, or the alternative that we were seeking, just doesn't work for us. It's not, and they don't even have to respond. They don't even have to respond to the alternative. They can just say, no, it doesn't work for us. Yes, we're going to cause harm to this community, but, in light of the fact that, we still need this project, so we're going to ignore the harm, even though we now know the harm, we're going to ignore the harm and we're going to build anyway. So that's how the law works. Unfortunately, environmental reviews do not stop projects. It's just a disclosure document. It's just a disclosure law.
Okay, I'm going to call on Zhang because it's almost 9 o'clock, and I know you had another community concern that you wanted to share with us. So if you need to go, you want to speak to us about that, Zhang?
Okay, yes. I'm gonna be as brief as possible. First and foremost, respond to Mr. Magnus. He made a comment saying that these people are not the boogeyman developers or something like that. But I quite simply don't see how, when they refuse or are trying to shirk their responsibilities to really put forth an environmental impact statement that addresses it.
I'm saying the majority of work done in New York is small alterations inside apartments. These are done by like families that hire a contractor. I'm saying that group of people is not the typical boogeyman that we have called developers in this community board.
Yeah, we're not talking about them at all. We are looking at
I know, and they can produce deep deserts of housing. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, but nonetheless, okay, well, as far as these developers concerned, they're not addressing these environmental impact statements that address issues such as parking. Opposed to addressing parking, what they're trying to do is just simply do away with parking. And most New Yorkers have cars. And one thing I do know is, if you want to get down to the bottom of something, when as far as business goes, you always follow the money. Right now, New York City's most expensive real estate is likely in Manhattan. And since all of Manhattan is now pretty much at capacity with real estate, they're just pretty much trying to expand. So now they're trying to turn the 5 cities, the boroughs, into the next Manhattan because it needs more space. And they're doing that to the detriment of the current residents inside of New York City. That's why what Ms. Boyd is saying, like, as far as they don't simply say that they don't explore alternatives. They simply say that it won't work, but there's a reason. They understand what they're trying to do. So I just want everyone to be cognizant of that they're just trying to be eloquent as far as using affordable housing, but that's nothing but a Trojan horse. So that was the first issue. I'm just gonna stop here and revamp the community concern that I had.
Did you want to talk about 777 Rutland? I don't know if you have to go or if you can wait because it's almost 9 o'clock.
Oh, I can wait.
Okay. Felice, I thought I saw your hand.
No, I'm just listening to this whole commentary here. I live right across the street from the Botanical Gardens, and the rezoning that they placed in this company, or this owner, this property owner, is to upzone once again. And this will destroy the Botanical Gardens. They don't care. I also live in a building, a pre-war building that they have the construction work, let's say here, which was or is to the detriment of the people that was living here. What I mean is this. They demolished apartment buildings while people were living here and stated that there's no one that lives here. This is a pre-war building. In pre-war buildings, and I'm praying to God, I'm praying to God, I'm praying to God, there's asbestos. I had to literally call Tish James to intervene so that they would have people to clean constantly so we wouldn't be subjected to the dirt and debris that they had disrupted, just to make small apartments. The small apartments that they have cost, let me tell you, small apartments, 1 bedroom is 2, 2 bedrooms is 4, 3 bedrooms is 5. You're talking about $6,000 per rent right now in this building. I'm just saying, this gentleman is speaking the truth.
I know there was a that some years ago, there was a building on your block that was 4 stories and the owner was proposing to put 7 stories on top of it.
That is correct too. And it was stopped. Asbestos, once again. Yes.
So that's an example of the kind of thing that can happen today as of right, because the buildings on her block meet a 6A, are built to a 6A density, that's a 3.0, but the zoning is 8A, that allows 6.0, that's double that. So he didn't demolish it because he would have to evict all the tenants and that's troublesome, but he was going to do something extremely unsafe. And that actually happened at 1 Sullivan. They did a cantilever, you know, the tenants on the top floor had cracking, they had other issues, and it's up now. And I see a sign there in the front window that says luxury units in the heart of historic Brooklyn. Okay.
Well, the reason why they couldn't build those additions, and they've made this a blanket decision on certain pre-war buildings, is because of the asbestos. So right now, even though they have the buildable space to build on top of these buildings are basically safe from having those types of development projects because
well, as long as
building, let me finish, Suki, because the Department of Buildings has determined that the kind of construction that would be required would expose these pre-war buildings to the current residents to asbestos. So in some ways you can say that even though the zoning would allow it, the actual conditions of the building will not.
As long as somebody at DOB isn't allowing it. And that's the, you know, as we've said, we cannot always count on these agencies to enforce. It was up to the residents on Washington Avenue to make a huge stink about it. You change somebody at DOB, policy changes, maybe the blast committee decides they're going to do away with a certain rule, right? And you get a group of tenants that's tired or bought out or whatever, and it's going to happen.
I don't think you're going to be able to change the asbestos rule. Sorry, Suki, that's not just going to happen.
Well,
I'll just add on to that.
Let me interject and say that
it's not about changing the rules, it's about who's enforcing it, right?
No, right. It's not about that either. It's now a blanket rule that DOB now.
Well, before you were saying that the issue is who's enforcing it, and I agree.
No, it's not about enforcement in this case. This is about allowing a permit to exist. They're not allowing permits to exist in pre-war buildings that can prove, and most pre-war buildings have asbestos. So they've made a blanket rule to DOB, and it's not going to change.
Yeah, if there's any filing with DOB, it needs to have something called an ACP5, which is an asbestos form that says that you're asbestos free. So there is a rigor and a system in place that does not allow renovations without having the proper documentation. And it's not just something that can get waived or like dismissed. It's serious stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that's why the building commissioner has been sued. That's why the building commissioner is in a lot of trouble, because we are now, this building is now in court with this slumlord, and we are winning, thank God.
But I think that the point is that it's happening unless somebody goes to court to stop it, right? It's happening inside buildings, it's happening on top of buildings. There are many, many examples in our community of pre-war buildings that have had stories added on top of them. Right? I mean, there are board members who have buildings like that on their block.
Not that I know of.
There are many buildings that have been old buildings from, you know, the beginning of the 1900s that have been demolished and something new is being built.
Well, demolish is that's something different, but building on top of, you know.
And yet there are many buildings where many century-old buildings where that's happening. So, you know, does everybody get an asbestos sign off? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe it requires somebody to complain. Yeah, I've heard of cases where people complained and the inspectors came out and stopped it. I've heard of cases where they deemed it was abated. And they keep building. I don't think that that's something you can count on. At the end of the day, the zoning law is supposed to tell you what you should and shouldn't be able to build. So the question is, should somebody be able to build 7 stories on top of a 4-story building?
Well, with the new text amendment, it's going to be taller than 4 stories. It's going to be 12 stories. So I'm not sure what we're arguing about here.
Well, precisely. I mean, under the current zoning on Felice's block, they can build up to 12 stories. Under the new zoning, they'd probably be able to add an extra 3.
So I've done this at a project in downtown Brooklyn. It was a supportive and affordable housing project at 50 Nevin Street. And we had to get all the documentation for asbestos. We had to reinforce some footings, rebuild columns. It's a big deal. If you've got detailed questions about what that process looks like, I can try to answer them, but it is not something that you just do casually.
No, I mean, I think a developer who's responsible would do all of those things. But I think the point is that it happens, right? I mean, what you were allowed to do, what you did, and you did it properly. It's not impossible for it to happen. Some developers are not going to do it properly and they're going to have to be sued. Some developers are going to do it properly, and if the zoning allows it, it's going to happen.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So this might be a good segue into the first time we had talked about the environmental effects of development, and we wanted to, you know, we wanted to get more specificity on that. So one thing that we talked about, sorry, okay. To go back to, okay. So starting with sewers, that was one thing that we talked about, what the impact on the sewers was going to be. If you go to the City Environmental Quality Review Technical Manual, which I suggest you all take a gander at because that's the standard that's used by the city, these environmental reviews are generally only done for rezonings. But what we had talked about was the fact that we've had a tremendous amount of development as of right, not under a rezoning, and the effects of that have not been reviewed. They're not cumulative reviews looking at the impact of all of the different developments together, even when in cases where there have been a rezoning. And so what is the effect? So for a rezoning, the threshold for sewers is 400 residential units. As you can see from the previous map at nyczoning.org, we've had close to 4,000 residential units developed, with another 2,600 coming. So that's several times the threshold. And almost none of it was pursuant to a rezoning. So these environmental reviews have, I know we had rezonings at the Bedford Armory. We had a rezoning for Crown Street, where the linen factory was. But we really haven't had rezonings for the majority of the development. And yet the threshold for development is exceeded several times over, and we haven't looked at the sewer impacts.
Well, I
So
just
in order
want
to find out, so let me finish, Alicia. You'll get your chance to talk. So in order to find out what is the impact of this number of units on the sewer system, we have to look at which sewer shed we're in. And then you're going to have to go to DEP and find out specifically what the sewer capacity is. But clearly, there is a very significant impact in our district that hasn't been looked at. So this is something that we need to go to DEP for. And I think the Environment Committee was going to meet with DEP, but I see they're not meeting this month. Okay, just let me get through this, Alicia, and then you can speak. Okay, so electricity, the electric grid was something else that we talked about. The seeker manual again has some numbers. For larger buildings, they're saying on average 126,700 BTU per square foot. We could probably look at the number of square feet being developed. Again, I think I sent that to Rod and Debbie at the Environmental Committee, but that Rod was saying that's something that we need to ask Con Ed about. They don't necessarily divulge if we're over the limits or not. But certainly, you know, with more buildings going all electric cars and so on, that stress on the grid is going to increase. Parking is another thing. So you can actually download DMV car registrations by district. So I looked at zip code 11225 because that's the only one that's entirely within CB9. We have two other zip codes that are partially in CB9 and partially in other districts. But within 11225 alone, and that's really only about, you know, maybe 40% of the district, there's 10,000 car registrations for the most recent data, which I think is either 2022 or 2022 probably. So I asked transportation, and if any of you are interested in this, I think Zhang said he was interested. Count the number of street parking spaces, number of free spaces, catered spaces, count the number of private off-street parking spaces that you know of, so that we can understand, you know, first of all, is there already an existing deficit of parking in the district? Because we see a lot of double parking, we see a lot of hydro parking and other forms of illegal parking. And what's going to be the impact of not having any parking at all for new developments? Because this 10,000 figure, right now we have about 40,000 households in CB9, and I would think within 11225, it's probably about 20,000. So that suggests to me that about 50% of households have cars. Whether or not we want them to, they have cars. And that's likely to be the case for new developments coming in. So where are all those cars going to park if there's not parking for them in their building? Okay, so the third thing I wanted to look at is housing affordability. And this was something that you mentioned, Alicia, is what is the impact of displacement? So from the Equitable Development Data Explorer, you can look at housing production numbers for different districts, as well as the median rent in 2010 and median rent in 2022. So I just picked out a sampling to show you on this chart. Here we have Bay Ridge and Diker Heights. Their housing production was 437 units for the 12 years. And they had an increase in median rent of 12.9%. PLG had a net housing of 5,177. They had an increase in median rent of 20%. And by the way, in case anybody's interested, these numbers are slightly different from the numbers by community district because they use neighborhood tabulation areas. That's a thing that's used by the census, but it does roughly cover PLG and South Crown Heights. Crown Heights North, that's Board 8, roughly, a little bit more development, 6,488. They saw a 26% increase in median rent. And Williamsburg and Greenpoint, where we know had tons of development, 22,000 units, a 50% increase in median rent. And I guarantee you that if you looked at every district in Brooklyn, this pattern would be followed, that there is an extremely strong positive correlation between the amount of housing, amount of new development, and the increases in median rent. There might be one or two outliers, but basically the more housing you build, the more median rents go up. And just the last thing before I call on people, other effects are safety and quality of life. We just talked about this. This is 1 Sullivan, where the 6 stories were cantilevered over the 6-story building. This is 170 Fenimore, which is at the corner of my block. Their back windows were all cut off. So you can see what previously existed here was 2 detached homes. So there's quite a decent amount of light and air that's getting in here. But when these homes were demolished and replaced with a 6-story apartment building, all of these windows were cut off. And I knew people who lived in these apartments and their only windows were here. And so they ended up living in a cave. And there's, you know, under the multiple dwelling law, you're required to provide a reasonable amount of light and air to your tenants. So her landlord had to give her a rent abatement, but it really wasn't enough. And she needed to move for her mental health and physical health. And she couldn't find a comparable apartment because this was a rent stabilized building. And, you know, as Alicia pointed out, you can no longer find a $1,200 studio at market rate. So she left, she moved out of state. So, okay, I'm done. Comments, Alicia, I know you're ready to go, and then Esteban.
I just wanted to note that going back to that 400 unit, the amount of units, that was our lawsuit that we filed against Cornell Realty when they were proposing to sit there and build almost 600 residential units. They downplayed the numbers and made the claim that it was only going to be 300. The lower court sided with us, did the math and said yes. But you know what happens in that is that the city is allowed to use any argument that they are willing to use to overstep those. You know, you have it in writing, but then the city comes up with, oh, well, you know, but, you know, this is what the developer said that they were going to build. So we're going to just go along with what the developer is going to build, not what the potential is, what the actual zoning allows. So in that case, it was one building that the developer claimed that they were going to build, when in factuality, when the new zoning would allow them to build 2 buildings. And now their building permit, guess what? They're building the 2 buildings. And so even though we have these laws, and even though, you know, certain things are supposed to happen, the city will just come up with an argument, no matter how silly it is. And they will say, yes, it will cause harm. Yes, we do need sewer impact. Yes, we do need to have more sewage. But, you know, because we're in a housing crisis, we can ignore the sewage. We can ignore that because it's just going to cost too much money for us to create sewer, you know, to upgrade our sewer system. And our issue of housing is imminent, is right now. We have to do something today. So we're going to do the rezoning, and then somewhere in the future, we're going to upgrade our sewer system, which they never do. So yeah, we can go through all of these, and you can sit there and say, yes, what will happen. But at the end of the day, they're not going to care because they already know. They're just going to say, yes, but we're in a housing crisis. We need more housing. And so we can forget about all these other laws and restrictions that protect the community, because our housing crisis is imminent and we need to address that first.
Esteban?
Yeah, just so back on the slide where you were talking about housing affordability, I think it's important to note that there would actually be, and I'd actually be interested in seeing how this would play out, but there's a big difference between sort of Empire Boulevard between Eastern Parkway and then Empire Boulevard, and then Eastern Parkway to like Atlantic. So saying PLG Southtown Heights is actually, like, the zoning is very different in this section, and for whatever reason, like we've done a lot of work in this particular area, MTOP and FLAC and THTU and even before that, tons of organizations for the last 10 years. And so you see now the significant difference, like even with the lawsuits, even though that development still went through, it was able to mitigate a ton of potential projects that were sort of percolating. And it spooked some developers, and it weren't the kind of developers that would have brought, you know, the kind of housing that we would want in this community. So if you look at CV8, and they went full out for the MIH options, and they now have the highest eviction rate in the city, and also have you know the I guess the highest number of Black residents that have been lost out of any neighborhood in Brooklyn, which is the highest number of Black residents in all of the city that has been lost. So like the comparison is really stark in those two, you know, between those two areas. And I think it's because we've actually, you know, fought hard to prevent it. So I think that's a success, and also just like an important thing to keep in mind as we're going forward. I also think I don't think that we've really seen this is actually going back to the previous topic a little bit, but in terms of like what a developer would demolish, I don't think we've seen the desperation that we're hearing about, at least right now, because if you think about what's happening in the red stabilized sort of landscape, the Supreme Court case that the developers brought did not undo the 2019 rent laws, and there are people with loans that are like coming due now, and they're going to do all sorts of crazy things to make up for that. And demolition is a really, even with the new rules that were just passed by DHCR, demolition is still going to be a really significant thing that we're going to, demolition and substantial rehab, but demolition particularly because they can empty buildings out of all the rent stabilized tenants, and it's like basically the only way you can do that now. So
and arson is
arson's another one. Yes. So I think that I don't think there's going to be data on that for a while, because you know we're just now getting data from 2019 and 2020 and 2021 and seeing that there's a bunch of deregulation, and deregulation is basically completely illegal right now, and it's still happening. So and then finally, like I caution folks to look at just take a, you know, if you want to do some digging, take a look at what sort of numbers were projected for development for every neighborhood that's been rezoned in the last 25 years and compare that to what actually happened. I mean, just for fun, go look at downtown Brooklyn and what Department of City Planning said downtown Brooklyn was going to be in the early 2000s, and check what it is now. And it wildly off base every single time.
In what direction, so, Esteban?
Oh, it always a lot more units, a lot fewer affordable units, much just a lot more infrastructure issues, because they didn't, you know, they were like, you know, we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of units, like completely in the opposite direction of what they were saying.
They were trying to rezone to promote business development, and they just missed the mark widely.
Wildly missed the mark, and now it's you know, it's basically a ton of luxury residential development, and it's because that's, you know, it's same kind of happened with Long Island City too. So anyway, all that to say that like I think that we've like the approach that we've had over the past decade has been successful, at least in that it's prevented some of these things from happening, and you know that
in CB9,
like, in CB9, and I'm talking about in particular between Empire Boulevard and Eastern Parkway, in the court cases that MTOP and FLAC and CTU folks were involved in, and then the Armory fight, like all of these things scooped developers that would have already like taken over Franklin Avenue, for example. You know, and even the, you know, the case that Alicia was talking about, that the lower courts were on our side, and then, you know, some political fun afterwards, and the appeals court was not. Even that had a huge bearing on what happened with the Spice Factory, and the reason that ended up being. Yeah. yeah, so that's, I mean, the work is important to do, even if like we didn't come out, winning on the other one. And I guess the last thing here, just since we're wrapping up, I would just remind folks, and I brought this up during the scoping hearing for the new Spice Factory plans that have come out, but it is the same developer that bought and sold the property that eventually turned into the Franklin Avenue rezoning, which is the ones on Crown and Carroll. So they're doing the exact same thing again. It's the exact same developer. I forgot the last. Not CP6, but the other ones, the original ones. So they're doing the same thing, and then it's still Continuum that's putting forth the plan. So it's like it's just like a huge eye roll. Like, I don't know what they expect from us other than to just keep fighting for for better stuff. But anyway.
Cheryl?
Yeah, I'm gonna just make a really quick statement. I rewatched and reviewed the City of Yes 4-hour meeting. And in the diagram for parking, they showed a studio appointment equivalent to 2 parking spaces. And also when they were speaking about the parking, one of the statements that the person said was, well, each neighborhood is different, which is true. And they said that developers will more than likely take into consideration the area in which the parking is necessitated or not. That's definitely a lie, especially with Esteban, with what he just explained. Andrew saying that they're not Godzilla. Listen, money talks, money walks, and they're going to follow the money at every time. If they see in our neighborhood here, where we living with 3 hospitals within our area, and 3 hospitals and a university, and say that we don't need parking for just putting up new developments or giving a minimum amount of parking, and they will take into consideration, I'm doing air quotes, of the area. That's not true. They're not going to give up building an apartment building or building apartments and lose money to give parking because they care about the neighborhood. They're not going to do that. We have to really be concerned with what we agree and say yes to. And I understand that the rezoning may or may not come. I don't know how much of an input we have to say what is in our neighborhood, but it's important that we take a stance as to what we are already dealing with and know that there's no developer that's going to say, well, I'm going to lose money because I want them to have parking. That's not a concern of them, because they will not be experiencing the no parking issue in the neighborhood, in this neighborhood, because they will not live here to experience what we experience. So we have to keep in mind that, just like what Esteban said, it's going to say one thing, we're going to do one thing, but it's always going to be exasperated with what they do say that they want to do. They're just greedy.
Okay. I'm going to open it up for general community comments. If anybody had anything about specific issues on your block or in your area. Zhang?
Yes, ma'am. Well, to start off, Suki, thank you for always clarifying and help me understand things whenever I ask you questions. I want to ask a question specifically about the 777 Rutland project, which is also sometimes labeled as 783 Rutland Road. It's the same exact place. It's currently a church. From my understanding of the minutes from the community board meeting that was held last year, they tried to propose the project to the community board, and it was ultimately shot down for various reasons. My question is this: typically, they have to go through ULURP and land use, but is there a way for them to be able to circumvent this process in order to continue the project? The reason that I'm asking is because I actually attend that church, and I am opposed to this project because I live in the community when the stakeholders of the church do not. And they keep on making certain comments, such as, okay, we're almost done with the ULURP, so just continue to pray for the ULURP, which makes me think that there's some way, somehow, are able to pass through this process without attending these actual ULURP, so the community could actually be aware of this. Because lastly, I asked the pastor, why don't you just try to talk to the community about this project? And he simply refused, which leads me to believe that they're trying to do something like behind the community's back. So is there a way for them to proceed with this project without going through the ULURP and behind the community's back?
Suki, I can
so
try to
there's-
answer that.
Well, let me answer this first, going back to the initial meeting. There's two issues with this particular site. There's a restrictive covenant that requires that the land be for church use only. And that covenant is administered by DCAS, the Department of Consumer and Administrative Services. DCAS has to lift that covenant. There are certain requirements for them to lift the covenant. And we were told that they were reviewing it. So Mia, have you been told whether or not DCAS has lifted that covenant? Has the board office?
No, we've not received any official documentation from DCAS advising of any signing off or the lifting of the covenant for that property.
Are you able to write to them for us to check?
Oh, we definitely can, but they would definitely to notify us if it was to take place.
Okay. If you could
Please.
write to them to check and then get back to myself and to Zhang, that would be great.
Sure.
So
Thank you.
they need to do that before they can proceed with any kind of development that is not a church use. Although of course the church use is permitted under community facility. So if the church is not that large, there's a certain amount of church that they can build as of right. The second thing is that if that and when that covenant is lifted, they can build residential as of right under R6 zoning. It's a wide street, so they can build up to 3 times their lot size. I don't know how many units that is, but it's, that's sufficient for an apartment building. That is not what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do was to double the amount that they could build in exchange for affordable housing and low-income housing. And so the reason, and as to why the developer would do low-income housing, first of all, for the zoning bonus, and second of all, for grants. Basically, this would be taxpayer subsidized. And they were also going to do no parking units for the residents of the building or the community. They were going to put back a church at the bottom and have some parking for the church. So a bunch of people who lived next to this came out. They didn't want this. They felt like the existing zoning should be enough if they wanted to build. They were very concerned about, what kind of a development it might be, the fact that it would have no parking, yada, yada, yada. So that was that. But they have never, to my knowledge, filed, and I checked the zoning portal again, they have not filed for any rezoning. You might want to check the building permits to see if any permits have been filed, but if they haven't started working, then then nothing is doing.
Okay, so now one last question, Suki. Now, let's say they are in correspondence with DCAS behind the community's back. What would be your best recommendation for the community to voice their oppositions to DCAS? Do we just send them email after email? Do we write them, or is there like some type of way that we can communicate with DCAS directly if there is any type of correspondence between the church and them?
And is it public record?
Okay,
yeah.
so it is absolutely public record if there's any correspondence, or it should be public record if there's any correspondence between DCAS and the church. So let's have Mia write to DCAS to find out what the status of this is, because we were previously told that they've been asked, that they're reviewing it, but they haven't gotten a determination back. So let's have Mia do that. And, you know, if we want to pass a resolution at some point to say that we're opposed to this, but let's also take another look at the conditions for DCAS waiving the covenant, because there are conditions, but it's not necessarily, you know, like it may not be as, you know, let's just take a look at the conditions and see what can be said.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Suki, and thank you, Ms. Hilton.
Cheryl,
Yes?
did you have another comment?
No.
Okay.
Just the fact that we were wondering if it was public record, if we can go on and look now.
I was told that there was a website for it. I'm not sure what it is. Mia, maybe you and Dante can look into that and let us know. So it's 9:30. I'm going to close, but I just want to throw this out there before I close. With respect to City of Yes, am I the only one who's just completely struck by these numbers? You know, like even under what could be proposed, and I'm just going to, you know, go back to this screen share for a minute. You know, even what could be built as of right is 3 million units. And the mayor is saying that he's targeting 100,000 units of housing. I just find, and then the City of Yes would add an additional 1.5 million units under a worst case scenario, right? And yes, Andrew, we are not talking about it being tomorrow. Of course not. All of these goals, plans, projections, we're talking about over a period of decades. So I'm just really struck by the difference between those numbers. You know, and just for reference, the city currently has about 3.6 million housing units. And I hear lots of people all the time complaining about the lack of parking, the traffic, the crowding, etc. So as of right, we could potentially double the number of units. And that would be more than doubling the city's population, since on average, there's about 2.5 persons per unit. And then another 1.5 million, and that's under one section of the City of Yes subzonings. There are other sections that affect, you know, areas like Staten Island and Eastern Queens more, that would add additional units on top of that. So I'm just really struck by the enormous amount of development that's possible both under our current zoning and under these proposed upzonings versus what we're saying the goals are. And I'm just wondering if anybody else is struck by that, and what do people actually think we should be building? You know, what is the goal supposed to be? How much do we think population is actually going to increase? I just saw something the other day that the census is saying, you know, maybe we're expecting like 10% population increase by 2080, which is like 60 years from now. That's not doubling the population.
So Suki, there's a couple of people that have their hands raised. I raised my hand, then Lorette, and then Felice. So I don't know if
Okay, so go ahead, John, and then we'll take Lorette and Felice.
So I think another way to look at this, and yeah, these numbers are when you look at them, shocking. But I think another way to look at this is vacancy rates. And in the city, yeah, I've seen that, you know, we have a 2% vacancy rate. So to me, that says that this 3.5.
Where does that 2% come from?
There was some, I forget exactly where I saw it, but just let's assume that is the case. I mean, I think we know that the housing supply is tight, that 50% of New Yorkers are rent burdened. More than 30% of their income goes to rent. So that really is a function of low vacancy rate. So even though there might be a 3.5 million number of units that could be built, they're not getting built for one reason or another. And I don't know what the reasons are. Maybe there's complex geometry, or maybe there's other restrictions with the parking. I don't know. But the reality is that we have a very low vacancy rate on the available built housing stock, and that new capacity is not being built. So I think this whole
So are
city
you
of yes
saying
thing,
that none of the existing capacity is likely to be built, or what percentage of the existing capacity?
I'm
do you think
saying
is
that
likely?
what this 3.5 million number is maybe not capturing the reality of what is actually out there within the city from a zoning perspective, that maybe some of this 3.5 is just not that buildable. I can't tell you what is of this 3.5, what could easily be built, what's more challenging to be built. But I'm just telling you that a low vacancy rate means that there is not a lot of capacity being built.
I mean, I agree with you that not all of it will be built, but we do have 120,000 units permitted, right? And you know, what are the factors that are preventing others from being permitted in the future should there be market demand? Is it the zoning? How do we know if it's the zoning?
I would assume it is the zoning, or maybe it's brownfield, or maybe it's the area doesn't support the investment.
So
I'm not sure.
I mean, how do we know what portion of it is market demand and what portion of it is zoning?
I'm responding to your query, soliciting from us reactions. And one of my reactions is that this 3.5 number it's probably more nuanced than 3.5, that maybe it's not, that we aren't building the 3.5. Maybe the 3.5 just can't be built because it's not, or some portion of it can't be built because it's not practical, it's not feasible. These tools that I'm sure you're using, these like open data sets, are very coarse, just because they have to be. We're looking at a city of 8 million people. It's hard to really drill down. I think we're all trying to grapple with that, that all these measures are very broad and not fine scalpel. They're coarse.
So that I mean, I agree with you that not everything that can be built will be built. But I'm just interested to know what you think is highly unlikely to be built that should be eliminated. Because I'd eliminated certain things. Like I eliminated landmark districts, I eliminated co-op buildings, because I didn't think those would be likely to be demolished. I eliminated anything that was like less than 800 square feet. Well, actually, I didn't even add alterations. This is just things that could be demolished, right? So I'm just curious to know, like, what things you think should, like, almost always be eliminated or highly unlikely to be built.
I'd have to do my own analysis. I'd like to cede the floor to Lorette.
Okay.
Good night. You were talking about numbers. As a resident that live over Winthrop, over here by Kings County Hospital, I have to say I'm still number one. I'm still just trying to get past the numbers that you say. First of all, Brooklyn is number one with all the housing going up, and then the 88,821, the one amount that are completed and the amount that we had to complete. It's just, to me, doesn't look like it's going to get any better, because you have so much people coming into New York. And so we are always going to need more, but I just feel like Brooklyn, as I think Zen said, it is going to be a little mini Manhattan. People leave there, everyone is leaving to come where it's supposed to be cheaper, but I don't know how cheaper and how affordable it is or it's going to be. So I don't even know if I agree with it, that it's supposed to be affordable, but affordable for who? The next thing was that they're talking about, I live on Winthrop, and it's over there by, close, as I said, by Kings County Hospital. And they would always say when, during the summer, when people have block parties, oh no, that block can't have any because over there is the hospital. So I'm saying with all these housing and everything being put up, would this interrupt the hospital and the ambulance and everything where they're supposed to have it clear for them to come in and, with the patients and the people going there, it's just going to be so crowded with Campbell, all the various different housing, Mecca building, building for drug addicts, homelessness. I just feel that it's not going to be as residential for the people who live in their homes. And I feel like people who have homes there are going to be in the back while others who are supposed to be in the affordable housing, it may or may not work out for them. But for the ones who have the homes and live in the district, I was telling someone else, I believe even that it's going to go down, because who's going to want to buy a home where you have all these high-rise buildings? And someone was saying, oh no, it's not going to affect, but I see that a lot more issues. And so I don't know, was any kind of research done as far as it's okay to have all these places built and the ambulance and all these hospitals around, because it's already Kings County downstate. Well, they've taken down Kingsbrook. So I just see the whole thing as overcrowded, and it's not a residential, it's not more family, it's going to be open to everyone. That's just my feelings.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Police?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Suki, for having this forum. This is a very important forum here, the ULURP Land Committee. I am union. So being union, I deal with all facets. What I mean is that I talk to all of the chairs from different agencies such as DEP, sanitation, police, fire, you name it, even inspectors I deal with, and that's with DEP. So everyone seems to want to live right here, but you can't live right here, okay? This gentleman by the name of Zen, he made a statement, why aren't we building outside of this parameter? Why must it be right here? I don't understand. And I say that to say this, they're not thinking about schools, okay? And this area is becoming very dense. They're not thinking about food. They're not thinking about sanitation. They're not thinking about water, sewage. They're not thinking about these things. And when you bring on these problems, and this will be a problem, okay, it's going to be hard to deal with. And let me just mention, I said I work with the police department. Yes, I do, okay, because I deal with all facets from transportation to sheriffs to police, okay. You're going with density, you have crime, okay, and this is what we don't want, okay, and you're going to see a lot of it. My question is, why aren't we, or why isn't that they're thinking of moving outside of the parameter of Brooklyn? Thank you.
Okay, Esteban and then Cheryl.
Yeah, I am curious in terms of using a supply argument here when we know that there's like more than enough existing units in New York City to house our entire homeless population, for example, and that we just don't. A lot of those are for different reasons, obviously, but I don't know that I don't know that just building is it affects that. I mean, like a lot of these are luxury units that are not affordable to a majority of residents, and that's really like the issue is that there's not enough apartments at the levels of affordability that are needed. It's not just an raw numbers game of how many units, and that gets spread out equally to everyone. Like no, like the real need is in that really low income band, and so I think the conversation is way more nuanced than just we just need more units. I think that's oversimplifies what's obviously a much more complicated issue.
Yeah, and that was something that we talked about at one of our previous meetings, was the deficit of extremely low income housing for people like below 30% of median income. Cheryl and then Rod.
Yeah,
and then
real
John
quick.
Craig.
Suki, can you put up that picture, the photo of Fenimore, of the apartment building real quick? And I just want to make a comment on it. And I'm actually kind of sad and surprised how that apartment building was even built. How did the Department of Buildings approve the removal of the fire escapes? Though there were fire escapes there, and they approved the removal of fire escapes to put up another building. So now if there's a fire,
it looks like the fire escapes are still there. It's just there's just so little space.
Wow. I mean, so you're going to be able to, if there's a fire, you can crawl into someone else's apartment. That's absolutely crazy. But listen, we obviously don't know the future, everyone. We do not know the future. This is something that we all know. We cannot predict this, right? But if you give an okay today for what can be built for tomorrow, at what point do we say no? Okay, we're planning to build and oversaturate with no increase to protection via NYPD, fire department, mental illness treatments, which is something that we need. I worked and I retired from the police department for 29 years. Trust me, no one wants that job. No, if I tell you the statistics of what they have, they would really be stupid. If they're taking that job, they're taking it to move on to somewhere else just to get the experience. We're going to be, they sent out a bed analysis recently. If you look at that analysis, for those that will get it, we are #1 in Brooklyn. Our area is #1 in Brooklyn with the highest in crime response rate from NYPD, the highest, which means it takes longer for them to get to us. We are first in Brooklyn, and we are just under Bronx. We're under Bronx. And then our area is next with the longest response time for in current crimes that are ongoing at that time. That's concerning.
Have you taken that to the public's? I said that's terrible. Have you taken that?
I plan on. Trust me. I plan on. I'm writing everything up now. But the statistics are there. This is something that an audit was done, and it's right there. BK9. We were first in the whole of Brooklyn with the longest response rate for a current crime that's going on as we speak. This is sad. We have to look at all the different social services, all the different services that are not going to be available to us. At what point? This is going to look like Cuba soon. Everything's going to be built up next to it. And like John says, and oh, well, this is just proposed. Yeah, but guess what? If we give the okay now, we cannot say, okay, we're going to give you the okay and you can only build up one. It's not going to happen. We have to plan. I say it over and over for the worst case scenario. If we allow something and give someone an inch, they're obviously going to take a mile. So we have to be concerned and also aware of what can happen. And we already see what's going on. I don't know how else to make it plain. Look at this. Look at the map that you have up. Look at what's coming. This is absolutely crazy. I'm done.
It's insane.
Rod?
Okay,
I'm sorry, I
quick.
missed John Craver. I'm sorry. John Craver.
Sorry, thanks, Suki. I just wanted to, I guess, put in my 2 cents. If looking at your map that's on the screen now, again, there's not a very fine filter that's been applied to this. These could be theoretical. I live in a 2-story townhouse. Theoretically, I could add about a story and a half. Is that going to happen? No, but that's a 50% increase in the floor area of this building. And then a 50% increase in the number of units that could be developed here. That's very unlikely to happen. And I would say majority of these row house blocks that are indicated as in the cyan color as being future development. I think very unlikely. There has been spot redevelopment here and there. There are buildings where a developer has bought the building and added 1.5 to 2 stories on top of the building. And they are required to add fire escapes. So now you have a multi-family building over a certain height. You had to add fire escapes to the front of the building. It's really quite unfortunate, but it's again, yeah, doubling the size number of units across the city. I could see the chance of that happening is about as close to 0 as you can get.
John Vital Brooklyn is coming. We never thought that would come either. 9 buildings.
I'm sorry.
9 buildings.
Okay.
So, John, I just wanted to say that yes, under the current R6 zoning rules, on your block, you could probably build up twice as large as what you have now. And if most of the people who own the homes are people like yourselves who intend to continue living here for a while, it's only going to happen in a few places. But under City of Yes, they would double the amount that can be built on your block again. So now you're going to get developers papering your block with "We buy houses all cash" notices. They're going to get whoever was on the fence about selling, right? Maybe once buildings start to fall and people are surrounded by these apartment buildings, and maybe they'll use the construction to intimidate you or whatever, more houses are going to fall. You only have to look at Linden and Lenox to realize that the entire block can fall within 5 to 10 years, because that is what has happened. There are people who own townhouses there that I know personally. They are like the last person left standing on that block in a home, completely surrounded by high-rise development. Okay, there were groups of townhouses on Clarkson, on Lenox, 4-story townhouses in a row, all demolished within a few years because they have R7 zoning. And R7 zoning is essentially what they're going to give you under City of Yes. You're going to go from an R6 2.4 density to 3.9.
Okay. All right, I understand that is what the proposal is, but again, I'm going back to what is you're displaying now as something that is a bit to be afraid of the current situation. I think it is not a reasonable comparison. I think what you can do is show.
What would you propose? What would you
I'm
propose
sorry.
is reasonable?
I was going to tell you, but I
Okay.
was cut off. Okay, so what would be reasonable to present is not this scare tactic of what could be built today, currently, that's not being built throughout our community board.
Well,
Which
it
is really
is.
what
It's just being built very slowly.
Okay, I will continue speaking. Thank you. And it is being built extraordinarily slowly. Okay, and if it's going to happen here and there, and that's going to happen based on current zoning. So what would be a better comparison and more helpful, because we're talking about City of Yes. That is the topic of what we are talking about tonight. And I've spent for the last 3 hours talking about this. What would be a comparison that would be helpful for the conversation is to show what is here now and what City of Yes potentially could do to district. And I think our focus needs to be on the district, because that is what we are empowered, not empowered, that's what our remit is. We are here as representatives of Community Board 9, and that is where our focus needs to be. That's all I have to say right now.
Okay. Rod?
Okay, well, Suki, first of all, thanks for hosting this meeting. I guess the concerns that I have is that the population of the proposed housing it's just not being distributed equally amongst the other districts in the borough and so forth. And that's just evident. I mean, there was an audit that came up. I started reading it briefly, and it sort of echoed that same message. Here in CB9, in the most southern part of the district here in East Flatbush, all right, we are very unique. Not only, as Cheryl was mentioning about the two hospitals that we have downstate in Kings County and Kingsborough, but we have two athletic fields where special events take place between Wingate Field and Boys High Field. All right, so between the athletic events, between high schools, special soccer games, cultural events, and other special events, there have been a total of 32 events that have taken place last year. This also includes the Wingate Concert Series. All right, none of this has been taken into consideration as far as the traffic, the density, the amount of people that we have. It's just crazy. And this should be taken into consideration with the city of Yes, and looking at our district as a whole as to the amount of housing that is needed and what is that we don't need. And as Felice stated, with increased population of people, you have crime. It just goes hand in hand. That's all I have to say.
Anybody else? So I just, want to zoom in a little bit more closely so you guys can see what actually this means, that we have the zoning that we have, what's happened already. Okay, so John, this is the block where you live. And so far it looks like you've had only one.
Hey, Suki, are you talking about me, John?
No, I'm talking about John Craver, because I know you live in the manor and nothing will ever happen under your block.
I think it's to point out individual people's houses. It's a little, I don't know.
Okay, well, okay, so let's look at I mean, since we're talking about CB9 and what is the effect locally, let's look at what's happened already. Here on Maple Street between Rogers and Nostrand, which is in an R6 district, right? If you click on these, you can see what each specific development is. Okay, so all right, so here on Lincoln Road, 336 Lincoln, 6 units, 322 Lincoln, 8 units. So these are not big developments.
I can't see anything.
289 Maple, 7 units, 246 Maple, 8 units, but there's been
Yeah,
four.
I can't see what you're pointing out either, Suki.
Okay, so there's been four in sorry, I'm not okay. So all right, sorry. Okay, so here, so in this area, we've had 4, 322 Lincoln, 334 Lincoln, 289 Maple, 245 Maple. These are not big developments, but they've been bothersome to the people who lived near it. It looks ugly, looks out of character, as one person said, makes my block look janky. I invested in a home. I wanted privacy. I wanted open space, right? Here between Nostrand and New York, we see several more. 382 Lefferts, 48 units, 8 units, 429 Lincoln, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Go down further south. We get to Rutland and Midwood. Well, this is Rutland actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Here's Fenimore Street. We've got this is near where I live. I don't mind pointing this out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hawthorne Street is particularly bad. We've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 developments. Many blocks have had, 3, 4, 5, half a dozen developments. And it's really not even in the last 10 years. I would say this is really since about 2014. So that is not a super slow rate of development. If they're relatively small developments, it's something that's disturbing to people who are homeowners who would invest in the block. Also, anything under 10 units doesn't require parking, so it's a potential loss of parking if that developer doesn't put in parking. And then some of them have been very large, right? So it's not, I wouldn't say it's an extremely slow rate of development that we've had close to 4,000 units in the last 12, 13 years. And then there's another 2,600 potentially in the pipeline, even if not all of those go through. So just, to give you a sense of what is it that the existing zoning allows, go through, look at the blocks near you and count how many buildings have been developed, and go back and ask yourself, was a house demolished for this? Was something added on top of this? This is the rate of change. This is not a small number of lots.
What can we do about it?
I mean, I think that we have to talk to, you have to talk to the powers that be. You have to talk to your council members. You have to tell them that this is a concern. And I think as a land use committee, we need to have a framework for land use and development. That's the only way really that we push back. You probably need to sue for environmental impacts, everything, honestly. But, the city of yes, as John says, is what is before us. That needs to be fought first. And it needs to be pointed out that we're already suffering here.
We've done our fair share. When you look at other parts of Brooklyn, they've had nothing close to this level of development.
I mean, I would say that many districts have done a lot. Like I was saying,
many have not.
Yeah, many have done a tremendous amount, right? Like Greenpoint and Williamsburg, downtown Brooklyn, and you're talking about 20,000 units. That's a tremendous amount. Bushwick, Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, Flatbush, all of these areas have done a tremendous amount. There might be some that have not, but far be it from us to say, what they should or shouldn't do in their own districts. I think the only point is, how much does the city actually need? Right? The mayor is saying 100,000 units. We have 120,000 that are permitted. As John says, most of them are going to go through. Do we actually need to plan for more?
Suki, I have my hand up. May I make
go ahead,
comment, please? Okay. First and foremost, I want everyone to be cognizant that typically when purchasing a house, that is typically the biggest investment that average person will ever make in their lives. So with that being said, this is a very sensitive and touchy matter to a lot of individuals. And since it is the biggest investment they'll make in their lives, it should be respected as a sensitive matter. Now, I thank you for just bringing up a point as far as bringing up to the council members, because you just made a light bulb pop over my head. Our current council member has been very evasive with us. Now, seeing that we live in the East Flatbush and Crown Heights neighborhood, we have a rather large Jewish community within this Community Board 9 borders. So now, CM Mealy, what she does is she has her meetings specifically on Saturdays. By having her meetings on Saturdays, it's it doesn't respect the Sabbath for the Jewish community, and as a result of such, it blocks off a lot of people who wants to voice their concerns to her. Both I and another individual of the Jewish community have sent her multiple emails, letting her know that her constituents want to meet with her. And I've attended at least 3 of her meetings, each on a Saturday. And the times that I do speak to her, she was like, "Oh yeah, we'll have to have one on a Sunday," and then she just completely blows me off. So now, so I want to point out that it's not that there's not individuals who want to bring up issues to her. It's the fact that she is strategically blocking individuals from coming to her because of having her meetings on the Sabbath. Now, during her last meeting, she, which was right after the city of Yes, she made no mention of the city of Yes. And seeing that this is such an explosively big change, perhaps the biggest change to ever happen in New York City, I find it absolutely puzzling why she wouldn't even make mention of this at all. And she didn't even attend the her last meeting, but she has never even mentioned the city of Yes. But I would like to ask, if possible, if perhaps this board or perhaps the general board could ask her why, or to accommodate the constituents that want to meet with her that can't meet with her on a Saturday because of their respective Sabbath. So if she can make some type of concession to have a meeting on an alternative day so she can hear the true voice of the constituents within her community.
Maybe she can come to a general meeting.
Yeah, I think possibly we could have a town hall on City of Yes and invite all of the council members. We could also ask them to come to our general board meetings, but I think if you want to focus specifically on City of Yes, maybe we can ask for a town hall. Mia, is that something that we could propose, do you think?
Definitely something to be discussed and brought up. Something that you can definitely bring up to the executive committee on Thursday evening. A conversation.
Okay. Let me just see if we still, do we still have quorum? 1, 2,
no,
we don't
I
still
believe
have quorum. We people have dropped off.
yeah.
Go
Very
walk the dog
I
too,
hate,
so
I
I've
hate
signed it
to,
off.
yeah, I'm about to say I hate that we are
we can
way past the
definitely
10 p.m. hour, so we have to kind of wrap this up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, just to make clear, I would try to abstain from the general board meeting because at the general board meetings, like the constituents can't voice their opinions directly to the council member as they can during her direct meeting. But I'll trust on and lean on your judgment to however you guys want to facilitate it. But you guys have a good night.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Zhang. So was there anybody else? And Zhang, I just want to add, there recently was redistricting for the council districts. So just make sure that you know who your council member still is. Just check whether it's still Mealy.
Yeah, it was allocated to also Rita Joseph. So she took a section. So yes, I'm aware.
Yeah.
Thank
So yeah, I think that, as Pat always used to say to us, we do want to hear from the elected officials. So I think we should invite them to come to the meetings. Is that something you normally did, Mia, or would Pat write to them?
The email will come directly from the district office. We usually reach
Okay.
out to staff and advise them make them abreast of what the issue is, what the targeted conversation is, and solicit availability, and basically determine if it's something that's feasible and if the council.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have all of them to come to the next ULURP meeting that they can, if you can write to all of our council members, staff.
Opposed to one of their representatives in their office that doesn't have any the authority to make any decisions, because that's what CM Mealy cleverly does. She may send one of her staffers, but the staffers has no power, authority over anything.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll see at the, you know, whether maybe we can do a town hall or something. And just speaking of that, does anybody have any updates on CM Hudson's land use framework? That was something that's been in the works since last year. Nicola, Felice, anybody, have you heard anything?
Last I heard was that she was just coming off of paternity leave, so they haven't released any findings yet.
Okay.
But
okay.
I'm assuming it's coming soon since she just got back. The other reason I raised my hand is I thought during our subcommittee meeting, we spoke about inviting DCP to come and speak to the community board so that we could ask them specific questions about City of Yes.
So I think that's going to have to be at the end of November, I'm told by the office.
Okay, but that's still in the works. That's what I'm asking.
Yes, yes.
Because that may be at the time for the officials to come in, because they can then hear our questions and hear what DCP has to say.
Yes, definitely. Anybody else? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Can I make a motion or no?
One of our committee members.
Motion to adjourn. I just stepped away.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Second.
All right. You guys have a good night. Suki, great meeting.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thanks,
Right.
Suki. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Mia. Okay, bye.
Good night.